Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to BRAP. It is Friday, September the 5th. Special BRAP tonight because I was out of town for work on Wednesday. I had a quick work trip, had to fly down to Orlando, Florida, just for a day, for 24 hours for meetings, and then flew back. But great to be back. Logic should be joining us here in just a second. And sorry for the late start here. I know some folks were waiting. I did see some folks leave. Hopefully they come back. But again, we usually don't do Friday nights. Again, just doing this because we didn't have a show this past Wednesday. But welcome, everyone. Please let everyone know we're live. Hit the like button. And if you're new, subscribe, hit the bell notification so you're alerted when we go live. I have some things to talk about tonight in particular. No more exclusives. And actually, someone actually, another YouTuber actually did a video about a tweet that I put out a while back about the conversation around exclusivity existing within a vacuum on X or Twitter. And I'm going to play a little bit of that. Did actually try to invite this particular content creator on the show. I don't think I heard back from them about coming on BRAP. But yeah, just wanted them to come on just to get a different perspective of things and kind of get a better understanding of their perspective of what I said, and then also add some more nuance to the conversation around exclusivity, in particular ecosystems and how ecosystems work. So it was yeah, I'll play that video in just a sec here. Give me just one moment. All right. So we'll get into that here in a little bit. Also, Ghost of Yote review copies have gone out. And I have to say that's that is pretty. I think that's a pretty good. I would imagine that's a good sign that that Ghost of Yote is available or actually out. The review copies are out. Gene Park put something out yesterday that he had a review copy. Gene, if you're listening, we've had you on the show before, and I know you listen every once in a while. But Gene, please, hey, you know what? I'll bring the pizza over. And if you allow maybe a few minutes of BRAP to have some hands-on with Ghost of Yote. Look, game comes out September 25th. So it comes out in 20 days. So 3 weeks. 3 weeks. They put out the review codes 3 weeks. So again, I think that's typically a good sign. Typically a good sign. That what's up, Ghostface Killer, Rob, major respect, Hero Down Under. I think that's a good sign. And what's going to be interesting, Hero Down Under says I changed my mind twice about the Yote Pro plate wand controller, but now I'm so happy that I pre-ordered them. Yeah, I did not pre-order the Ghost of Yote plate, but see, this is what I talk about that people don't realize. We'll talk about this later when Logic joins, but this is my point about exclusivity and it having downstream impacts to the ecosystem. So, for example, you have the Ghost of Yote plates, you have the controller. Sorry, he said Ghost of Yote Pro plate and controller. I'm sorry. What's up, Dryad? And so this is the downstream impact that I'm talking about, where now PlayStation is making additional revenue. And those plates aren't an expensive thing for PlayStation to put together, right? It's not a heavy lift. But here they are. They're in controllers too. I mean, they're putting out these customized controllers. People are buying them. So you have people like me or Hero Down Under who have already purchased PlayStation DualSense controllers, and now Sony's selling you another controller. So you may have 4 or 5 controllers laying around in the house. But that's the point about the ecosystem that people tend to forget, and why people, what people only the only conclusion that people arrive to as it relates to, well, they got to put their games everywhere because they're missing out on potential revenue. Sure, I think that's true, but that's a bit short-sighted, and it's more of a short-term boost and a long-term boost. And the long-term is what they're looking for. They're looking for people to, as any ecosystem, right, works. They're looking for people to spend more money in the ecosystem. And I hear people throwing around MAU, monthly active users, and I don't think people really understand what MAU is, and what's really behind MAU, and what's the MAU doesn't mean anything if you have 300 monthly active users, right? I'll use an example. 300 let's say you have 300 monthly active users, and those monthly active users are only spending $1 a month in your ecosystem, right? So that's $300. Now let's say you have 100 monthly active users, but those monthly active users are heavily engaged in the ecosystem. They're bought in, they're dialed in, they're buying games, they're buying accessories, and out of that 100, they're spending $500 a month, right? I'm sorry. Let's say $800 a month. So they're spending more money, even though you have less MAU. And so that's the point of the ecosystem, and that's the thing that people forget. It isn't just about monthly active users. It's about how much or how many dollars those monthly active users are spending over the course of a month or a year, whatever the case is, in the ecosystem. And so these things that Sony's doing, like these, like Hero Down Under saying the Ghost of Yotei Pro plates and the Ghost of Yotei controllers, these are additional spends. These are additional items that people are going to spend on because they're excited about an exclusive that is releasing on PlayStation. You can't get this anywhere else. It creates a sense of excitement, FOMO, if you will. It's a real thing. Look up consumer psychology and how consumers, from a psychological perspective, approach things and approach purchases, and how they value exclusivity and brands. Those things matter. Those things have value. I mean, as much as people want to buck the notion of differentiation in the market not being a thing or not being valuable, even Xbox, as an example, has differentiators, within its own ecosystem. If you look at Game Pass, the Game Pass Ultimate tier allows you to play games day and date, allows you to play games across Xbox and PC, right? The Game Pass, the differentiator there, ultimately, if you subscribe to the tiers that allow you access to their first party games, day one release, that's a differentiator because Game Pass is going to allow someone access without paying that $70 in addition to all the other games that release to that service, right? So that's the differentiator. That's what Microsoft is using to differentiate itself in the market. The idea of Play Anywhere is a way for them to differentiate themselves and their ecosystem from Nintendo and PlayStation. And what I'm not going to do anymore is people tend to exclude Nintendo. And I'm not doing that anymore. And Nintendo should be part of this conversation just as much as PlayStation is, because Nintendo is also a hardware manufacturer. They're in the gaming. They have probably more so of a walled garden than even PlayStation. However, Nintendo has, in a traditional sense, gone outside its own ecosystem and put some of their IPs on other platforms like mobile, in film, television. And that's the other thing that people tend to miss, is that when you listen to Nintendo, you listen to PlayStation talk about other platforms, they're not just talking about the IP existing on other gaming platforms. They're also discussing their IP. This again goes back to Nintendo and PlayStation. We go back and listen to how they talk about their IP, the metaverse, if you will. They're actually releasing their IP and their on other platforms. And the platforms aren't necessarily just gaming platforms. People tend to think that, because I think that's just the natural thing to think. If you're talking about video games, you assume they exist only on video game consoles, or that's the only place that they could generate revenue. That's not true. You look at Nintendo having theme parks. You look at Nintendo, and Matt Piscatella, by the way, had a conversation with Matt Piscatella of Circana, formerly NPD, on Blue Sky. He talked about this idea of exclusivity outside of the traditional walled garden. And I said, "Is this why PlayStation is bringing some of its game to Xbox and PC?" He said, he basically said something to the effect of, "No, it's just more than Xbox and PC. It's about bringing their IPs to other platforms like movie, television, theme parks, the merch, if you will." Chronoreg says, "BRAPs at that price for the Legion Go 2 going to make the PlayStation Switch 2 obsolete." What's the Legion Go 2? I didn't see the price for the Legion Go 2. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Okay. So it's 1,090. I'll say this. I think there's going to be a lot of conversation around the pricing of the Xbox ROG Ally X when that price point's revealed. Be a lot of conversations around that. It's going to be interesting. Does that mean Nintendo won the console war? I mean, maybe. So that's the other thing, and it was interesting that Matt Pixatella mentioned that about IPs existing on other platforms. So it's just not about existing on video game platforms. It's also about existing on other things like television, movies, and those things definitely do have downstream impacts to to the ecosystem, to games. I mean, we saw a boost in The Last of Us. I'm gonna get Game Logic in here. Game Logic, what's going on, man? Or Hampus, I should say.
Not much, man. How are you?
I'm already ranting and rambling on here about ecosystems and because it's funny. Hero Down Under, the reason why I started rambling off about ecosystems, Hero Down Under, he purchased the Ghost of Yotei custom plates and the Ghost of Yotei controllers. And I said, look, that's what they want you to do. That's why they have these exclusives.
Oh, he's participating in this thing that we call CLV.
Exactly.
That is a term that I've been putting out that others are familiar with, that has been flummoxing those who enjoy spending their time on Twitter talking about things that they don't know about. But we're going to church tonight, so I'm very, very happy to be here with you, with the audience, with the congregation.
Oh my goodness!
So we can join in. So that we can join in fellowship here in the Church of Truth. So we can put some things to bed. So we can talk about content creators being disingenuous, some presumptuousness, attempts to assert the moral high ground, altruism. We're going to get it out tonight. It may not be a lot of news tonight, I will admit. And I am the news guy. I'm the guy who's constantly thumping the gavel that we should be spending time on news, but I don't know if we're going to have time for it tonight.
Maybe not. And it's Friday night, I actually, and earlier I was discussing Ghost of Yotei. The review codes are already out. And historically, like from PlayStation, when they're putting out those review codes, when they're giving them out 3 weeks ahead of release, that's usually a good sign.
Yeah, so, definitely. Because it's a crazy thing. Maybe there's just consumers out there in the gaming market that actually like high quality stuff.
I mean, this is the part that kills me. How is God? We talk about this like a lot, where people treat the gaming industry or the gaming market like it's different from other consumer products. In other consumer products, we don't argue that people like nice things, that people will pay for nice things, that people will pay for things that are paywalled or exclusive.
Like we don't have luxury cars, like we don't have designer jeans, like we don't have things that create a desire and a demand for people to go get them.
I mean,
FOMO's bad. FOMO bad. Me Grimlock, FOMO bad.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Me Grimlocks. I'm taking the Dinobots home with me. We're not going to hang with you tonight, Optimus.
Like,
Optimus
look,
Prime.
people make nice things for people to go out and buy nice things. We ain't all in this gaming market because we want just good enough gaming. Like, I'm tired of it. Like we have this term in this environment that I work in. It's called low price technically acceptable, LPTA. That means it meets the minimum bar, the absolute minimum bar. If D wasn't good enough, then they wouldn't have made that the passing grade, right? And that's for competitions and customers who want things. Then the only thing they care about is low cost, right? It just needs to meet the need. We do this as consumers, right? My TV, my monitor that I have down in my man cave, right, is north of $1,000. You and I talked about this year. Then my family came to me and said, "Hey, we want a bigger TV," and I'm like, "Cool, okay, but they don't need 4K, 120 hertz, HDMI 2.1, Dolby Digital, right?" Like, so I needed a product that was minimum technically acceptable and low price. And that created a difference in how I went out and participated in the market. But everybody's not in this gaming market to go after stuff that's low price. And the stuff that's not low price, the high quality stuff, tends to not be distributed in a position, right, where everybody can go get it. People forget about how the Apple Watch initially launched. When the Apple Watch initially launched, you couldn't just go buy that off the Apple Store. You had to go into the store to get it.
I remember that.
Right?
But why did Apple want you to do that? I mean, Apple, they wanted you inside the store so you could potentially spend more money.
Yeah, because you're probably not going to come in and just buy a watch.
Exactly. Right? That's the point of the storefront. I mean, and that's the part that people tend to miss. They tend to oversimplify, and they're so focused on, well, if you sell this $70 game on Xbox or Nintendo Switch, you're going to make more money. You're leaving revenue on the table. Sure, you're leaving revenue on the table. But that's a bit short-sighted because they're not going to make any more money off that consumer who just bought that one-off, copy of Ghost of Yotei, whatever, or Spider-Man, because everyone likes to say that Spider-Man's coming to Xbox. They want you to do what Hero Down Under's doing. When the Ghost of Yotei comes out, they want you to buy those Ghost of Yotei plates for your PS5 Pro, which, by the way, you probably upgraded from your original launch PlayStation 5. So now you're two consoles into it, right? You're what? You're $1,200 in the hole right there in the PlayStation ecosystem. Now you're buying custom plates. You're buying another controller, which may be your fourth or fifth DualSense that you purchased this console generation, on top of the $70 you're going to pay for Ghost of Yotei. There's more value in that for that. There's more value in that for them. Or I don't know if I'm saying that right, but I'm a bit tired. But yeah,
that's the business, right? Yeah. Then we have the consumers. And I think this is the thing that I had the most problem and issue with this week. There's consistently this effort, this narrative, this agenda, and it is a narrative. It is an agenda. It is politicking, right? It is out here pandering to masses that are probably aligned in the spectrum where there's a feeling that there's elitists, and that's fine. But more so, there's also just plainly, clearly, unquestionably, right? It's an Xbox fan base that has felt insulted and denigrated over a decade and has had, admittedly, PlayStation fans who wag their fingers in their face about things that they can't have. And this whole thing, this whole politicking, political agenda, pogrom, right? Super PAC, right? This is all about
political action committee. Is that where we're going?
This is all about wanting to have something taken off the table of PlayStation so that those people can't make fun of them anymore, which is an incredibly childish, immature perspective to have.
And that's why I call bullshit on the narrative of exclusives are going away and exclusives are good everywhere, because a lot of that community, a lot of the and I said this last week, I'm not going to be PC about this anymore. A lot of the influencers, the Paris Lilies, the Destin Legarys, the Boomsticks, and I'll never forget, this is before Boomstick and I had a falling out. He called me. He called me the day that we found out that they were buying Bethesda. And he was like, my goodness, Brap, can you believe it, brother? He doesn't talk like Hulk Hogan, but he was excited. He was like, look, this is huge. You're going to get all these exclusives. And he was genuinely excited. Boomstick was. He's probably changed his tune a bit now. Oh, they all have. About the idea of Bethesda games being exclusive to Xbox. And they all were. Paris literally said, well, it doesn't make sense if they don't make these games exclusive. In regards to the acquisition of Bethesda. Same thing with Destin Legary. And what I question is the pivot. As soon as Microsoft started changing their narrative or the tune to Cycle Gamer. Gee, you're not wrong. Because I probably put out a tweet. They're talking about me. But they literally in sync changed their narrative, their tune, once Phil Spencer started saying, yeah, you know what, games everywhere. Which, look, I don't think that's a bad thing for Xbox. If that's where they feel they're going to be most successful in delivering games for consumers, that I don't have a problem with that.
And the proof that it is partisan politics is what you said earlier. They never bring Nintendo in the conversation. Oh, Nintendo's special. Nintendo's unique. Nintendo's an exception. For Christ's sake, there are 3 console competitors on the market. And if you take 1/3 of that sample population off the table and say that they're an exception, I don't think that that's statistically accurate. Right?
No, they're not an exception. they don't bring Nintendo in the conversation, because when you bring Nintendo in the conversation, it flattens their argument. Right? Like and I said this earlier, I don't know if you heard me, Logic, when the show started. I said, look, moving from now on, just moving forward, I'm going to talk about Nintendo and PlayStation. I'm not leaving Nintendo out of the conversation, because they're also manufacturing their own hardware. They also have a walled garden. They also have an ecosystem. And to an extent, they've also put their IP on other platforms. And on top of that, when I'm discussing platforms, and you and I've talked about this, if you listen to what Herman Hulse, even some of the leadership of Nintendo, when they speak about bringing their IP to other platforms, they don't just mean their IPs on other gaming consoles or or PC or mobile. They're actually saying, hey, we're looking at other ways to monetize our IPs that we value, that hold value in the market outside of gaming, movies, television, theme parks. Actually, and I think I shared this with you, Matt Piscatella and I were talking about this on Blue Sky Social. I think it was earlier this week. Matt's like, yeah, that's when they're talking about platforms, talking about these other things. But that's the conversation people don't want to have. They just want to, I think like you say, Logic, quite often, is they just want to flatten the argument or take the nuance out of it and totally focus on gaming. And only in terms of like the other argument I hear is, well, they need money. Or if you bring up Nintendo, well, Nintendo's cost of development isn't that much money, their margins are higher. Yeah, that's true. But guess what? Like, you don't have to put your games on other platforms to make your games more profitable. There's other cost controls, other levers you can pull to control cost. I think we talked about this on this show when Falky was on last. You can also do other things like release television shows that have a knock-on effect to game sales. We saw that with The Last of Us. We saw that even with Fallout. So I think there's a lot of things people purposely leave out of the conversation. To your point, Hamp, because it's politics.
Convenient.
It is convenient. It's politics. They're like JFK in front of Congress.
We had one of the proof points this week, right? Was this discussion?
JFK
this claim,
Jr., by the way.
Right.
No, I said JFK. I meant RFK Jr.
Right.
I keep saying JFK. RFK Jr.
Was we had this assertion that that Ghost of Yotei was not going to be sustainable. And even though we're going to get spiritual tonight, right? I'm hoping some of y'all catch the Holy Spirit up in here tonight. We're also going to, as we normally do, put out the data and the numbers, right? So all this concern about Ghost of Yote is not sustainable. Spider-Man 2 sold 11 million units in 6 months before it was ever ported to PC. They needed to sell 7.2 million units in order to break even. In the time since they broke the 11 million number, it's been in the top 20 of the NPD charts 3 times. May of 2024, where it came in at 13th, still not on PC. March 2025 had just shown up on PC, came in at 19th. And it showed up again just last month, July, right? Or I guess technically 2 months ago, 6 weeks ago, whatever, ranked in at number 19. Does PlayStation need to put Spider-Man 2 on the Xbox Series X and S in order for Spider-Man 2, which had a budget of $300 million, to be sustainable? Stop the cap. The only reason that this is a discussion topic is because there is one group of partisans, the proletariat, who are upset that there is a platform that they perceive as their enemy that has these exclusives. And they put anyone who talks about that topic in that bucket. You're a PlayStation fanboy. So now let's talk about consumers and why it makes a difference. So point number 1, and I'm going to put this out. You can tell me how you feel. Congregation, you can tell me how you feel. If I go and I buy a $500 piece of hardware, I see it as a positive that the company that has sold me that hardware, that I have given them $500 worth of my personal investment for, that they are dedicated with an employee base and an intention to invest in making software that is bespoke and specific to that hardware, and that they are not distracting that core central group of developers with a focus of putting those games on other platforms. BRAP, do you find value in that?
Absolutely, I do.
Congregation, do y'all find value in that? I know I find value in that. I believe that that increases my ROI. Because what I believe is that a cadre of developers, so whatever it is, PlayStation, what, 20, the Xbox employee base is like 21,000 people, right? So,
like that.
so PlayStation, I don't know, 15,000, 20,000, whatever you want to call it, right? But take the 100 people at Nix's off the table, take the 100 people at Bluepoint off the table, right? 200 people off the table. The fact that they have a standing army laser focused on making software for that hardware that I paid for, what I believe in my stock prediction, right, is that my return over the 7-year life cycle of that hardware is going to be of higher value. Now, I know other people are trying to do the same thing. EA is trying to put content on my platform. 2K is trying to put content on my platform. Ubisoft is trying to put content on my platform. But what I expect is that their standing army of people will never obtain the same level of domain expertise as the developers that are first party, part of that company, working with that hardware every single day, day in and day out, living with the people, in close contact with the people who design that hardware, working on top of their own proprietary abstraction layer, which is not DirectX, but is specific and proprietary to PlayStation. Using an upscaling technology that is in-house, that is being developed through close partnership with the silicon provider. I think that that has the potential to return higher ROI. So if you ask me why I find value in exclusives and why I hope they continue to some degree at some level, it's not because PlayStation. It's because that I believe developers who are allowed to code as close to the metal as they can have the greatest opportunity to be successful and to turn out great games. That doesn't need to be the fact for all game development in the market, It doesn't, quite frankly, doesn't necessarily need to be the majority. Right now, we have one vendor who does exclusives. I mean, true exclusives, not timed exclusives, nothing, nada. They make a game, it is for that hardware, period. We have another vendor who intends to put their games everywhere. They intend to put them on Xbox, they intend to put them on PlayStation, they intend to put them on PC, they intend to put them on the Switch, right? And I think that's good. Then we have another vendor that's in the middle. Let me foot stomp. Let me pound the gavel. Let me wipe my brow up here on the altar. Right?
By the way, we are taking collections today.
Right? We have a vendor that's in the middle, right? That is primarily focused on putting their games on their proprietary hardware and salting some of the other platforms with some of their other content.
Mm-hmm. Who does that sound
right?
like?
It was admittedly let me add to that, was a dedicated, deterministic, unquestionable intent, mostly, to put the vast majority of the games that they initially make for that hardware also over on PC. Right? What does that give to us as consumers? That gives us choice.
Thank you for saying that. Why are people arguing against choice?
I've been saying it since I've been on the show. It is not in our interest to have a singular business model across the entire market.
Logic, but this is the part that frustrates me. Why are people, these influencers, right? Some of these media types, maybe media types is being too generous. But why are they arguing against their own self-interest as consumers? Choice.
No, here's my real problem, BRAP.
Yeah.
Here's my real problem.
Yeah.
Right? They're not arguing against their own interests. They're arguing against ours. And this is my big problem. My big problem is there's this effort to assert the moral high ground, to assert that they're advocating for consumers, to assert that the thing that they're asking for is better than the thing that we're asking for. And they're being dismissive of the things we're asking for because PlayStation.
But they never bring Nintendo into the conversation. I want to bring that up again.
So look, here in the House of Truth, I'm not allowed to curse them in the face of the Lord, right? I'm not allowed to talk about, right, violation of the commandments, about how that makes me feel. But let me tell you, you guys who are out here doing this, you do not speak for me. You do not speak for BRAP. You do not speak for the members of this congregation. Ain't nobody gave you license or asked you to not mind your own business and be running around telling people that you speak for gamers, that you speak for consumers, that you speak for the little man. Right? You don't. I don't want games that are, right, in a challenging environment where we have people building games on top of the most popular engine, right, that in general are not doing well, have not been doing well since the beginning of this generation, consistently come out with performance problems. And what you guys are advocating for is for a stoppage of people coding to the metal and making games specific to a singular set of hardware. Letting that team focus on doing that, on delivering the highest quality product that they can, or at least try to the people that have made investments to buy their hardware. You guys don't speak for me, and you don't speak for all consumers. You do not even speak for the vast majority of consumers in the market, because the vast majority of consumers didn't vote to be on the platform that is maneuvering in a direction towards agnosticism. The vast majority of console consumers actually voted to be on the platforms that still make exclusive content. So how in the world do you be so presumptuous as to say that you're arguing for consumers?
They're only there because they're friends list.
Or because of their digital ecosystem, because they're locked in. Let's completely discount the notion that new consumers are coming into the space every single day.
which according to PlayStation's at a clip of 30% of PlayStation 5 owners did not own a PlayStation 4.
Let's discount. And I hate to be morbid, but I'm going to say it because you guys are forcing me to surface all of the truths, right? Let's ignore the fact that, quite frankly, we have generations of gamers that are dying out. So while we run around waving our terrible towels talking about no growth, yeah, no growth, but we're also not in a point where we're contractionary either. Yes, there are some gamers who are maneuvering out of the space because they died, or because they just got too old and they lost interest, or because they're on Social Security and they don't have the sustainable income anymore, right? Or because they're soon to be on Social Security, approaching retirement end, right? And so they're crunching down on saving money and they're not spending as much on gaming. But we have new consumers coming into the space every day. We have this whole thing about, oh my God, the rise of mobile, right? Phones and tablets. And like, there's so many people. It is not displacement. You guys need to stop misunderstanding the notion between correlation and covariance. You can have things going on at the same time. I'm sorry, covariance and causation. You can have things going on at the same time that are not causalities. That's not the reason why it's happening. There's been a rise of mobile, 80%, right? Or whatever it is, right? But that does not displace people playing games on console. We have a $50+ billion business in consoles. $50 billion plus dollars.
Which, by the way, is predicted to grow. We talked about that a couple weeks ago. I shared some of the different research analysts and their predictions on the growth of the console market over the next couple of years. Talked about that too.
Yeah, it's 7% CAGR.
Yeah.
Right. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about some other things, right? That people get conflated. It's 7% CAGR, right? It is 4.3% negative projected revenue. We're on the Circana board. People get those numbers conflated. CAGR, which is coming out of things like the Pew Institute and some of these other organizations, is a global metric that is smoothed over a multi-year curve. The Circana number is a readjusted revenue projection for the United States for this year. So those numbers are different. They are not necessarily in conflict. You do not cancel each other out. But you definitely have yokels running around saying that those numbers cancel each other out. That those numbers are opposites.
How do people? Oh my gosh! I can't.
That's worldwide, Josh. It's global. The CAGR number is global.
CAGR, yeah, it is global.
It's smooth over multiple years, right? So what you have is you have a rolling wave.
Yeah.
Right. You move the window to the right. Take a projection snapshot. So what you have is you have within that calculation, you have oscillations that are allowable, right? You have dips, you have rollbacks, right? But then you have an overall number that they look at over a 5-year window or whatever it is. So my point about this discussion of exclusive content from a consumer perspective is not because PlayStation. It's because of wanting a desire for high quality games to show up on the market. And look, if you're on a platform whose titles haven't gotten a lot of rewards, don't have high sales numbers, partially because the corporation that you so much propound, right, that backs them doesn't put a lot of that information out. It gets obfuscated and clouded by the engagement numbers of Game Pass. That's not any of our fault. That's not any of our problem, right?
By the way, Logic, real quick, I mean, interrupt. You talked about the people point to, I guess, a decline in maybe spending in console. Is that what you're referring to?
No, what I'm saying is when the tariffs went into effect in August, right? That at the beginning of the year, the Circana number outlook for revenue was, I think, barely positive. I think it was like 4.3% positive, right? But after the August tariffs went down, that number was readjusted to project a negative 4.3% reduction year over year in revenue. But again, the Circana numbers is entirely based on the U.S. region.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say, I think when people look at, because I've seen this happen, where people aren't paying attention maybe to or understand the impacts of inflation, that consumers are spending less because the uncertainty of the economy, and this kind of back and forth with, tariffs are on one day, they're off the next day. That's going to have a trickle down impact to video games. I mean, not just the console market, but the gaming industry in general. So, but I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's a good point. Let's talk about that. I had actually a really good conversation with a person who was, I think, coming in at a good vector, but didn't necessarily stick the landing, in terms of, again, the causality that they were trying to build behind their case. So this notion was that, and I had two separate threads going on. I think they were maybe responding to another one, but whatever. But so a lot of my pushback this week has been about this whole notion of kids on the future generation only wants to play on phones and tablets. And so part of this person's discussion, I won't say argument, it was actually a discussion, was that well, look, people are now having contentions, right, for similar rate surrogates potentially in the consumer electronics space, right, for these children, these kids in younger generations. And they were saying that, hey, in the US, you guys, you put a PC in the household, so that's a cost. And then you provide a kid with a phone and a laptop, for school and work, and a console. And then as those economic pressures are building up and things are going the way they are in the economy, there's less and less money, right, to spread out. And so, if you already have to buy a PC, or already have to buy a laptop, or already have to buy a phone, and you maybe decide you don't want to spend that money for a console, then that's what's causing this shift of people to phones and consoles. So, but then they landed on this conclusion that consoles aren't dying, as they say. A lot of analysts have said, but there's still use cases for consumers, and it's not disappearing. So I told him I agreed with your conclusion, but I don't quite agree with how you got there, right? So a few numbers I want to point out. In the U.S., in-home PC market penetration, right? In-home PC market penetration did not achieve greater than 51% until 2000. In the 80s, it was in the single digits, and about 15% in the 90s. So that's percentage of households in the U.S. that had a desktop computer, right, in their household, that had a PC in their household. Console household market penetration hit over 50% in 97, 98. So again, that formulates the number. So in the early 2000s is the first time that you have started to see this notion of an overlap in U.S. households of both PCs and consoles at scale. Money being spent on kids for phones. In the U.S., the average age of a kid is given their first smartphone. So taking off the table these lockdown safety phones where the kid can only call to and receive calls from one or two phone numbers, and the thing doesn't have a camera and all that. Take that off the table, right? Right, but the first time that they are given a smartphone in this country is average age is 11 to 12 years old. Most of those phones that they get are hand-me-down. So I upgrade my phone, I give my kid, right, the phone I'm replacing. So most of them are hand-me-downs, and then a lot of them are these sub $200 starter phones, right? That cheap Android devices, etc. Are people in the U.S. buying their kids laptops for school? 42% of school districts in the U.S. issue kids Chromebooks. They are not paid for unless the kid loses it or breaks it. And then you can pay a insurance fee. So in my school system, it's $30 per student. You can pay an insurance fee, and when you pay that insurance fee, you get a certain number of repairs, right? And then sometimes a replacement. So there's not a huge market of people buying laptops for kids in grade schools in the U.S. And of course, once they're 15 years or older, they're eligible now to get a job. Admittedly, the youth employment rate in the U.S. of children age 15 to 18 who have not graduated from high school and are dependents living at home with a legal guardian and are employed is only about 10 to 12%. So it's only about 10 to 12% in this country, which I was amazed. Found that was amazingly low. But there's a very, very small percentage in this country of kids in high school, right, who are actually working and making their own money. But my point of building all that up, right, from a data perspective, is that in households, there's not a ton of money being spent on kids for those consumer electronics that are competing. Now there's maybe other data that's pertinent, right? Maybe you're buying a tablet. I don't know. Like we buy them as like an entertainment device, but like once every like 4 or 5 years. Like it's not a huge expenditure. My point is that from all the data I'm looking at, there's not some huge expenditure going on that's kind of mandated. It's not like it is for adults. We're like if you're an adult, you have to have a smartphone, basically, right? It was really just kind of where we are from a lifestyle perspective. And I get if you're buying the iPhone 17 next week, like I am, if you're buying the iPhone 17 next week and it's north of $1,000, then maybe you're making some choices on whether or not you're going to buy a console. So I get that, right? That's where we are today. But as far as like that contention existing like for kids, that no, it doesn't. It's not. So as we go throughout this year, 2025, with the economic uncertainty, tariffs, first real dip in GDP that we've seen, things are going to get tight. And there's going to be this decision making about, am I going to buy a console? Am I not going to buy a console? Particularly now that all the consoles have gone up in price. So that's happening this year. But let's talk about the last 5 years and let's talk about this generation, right? Because a lot of this discussion about, they only want kids and tablets and that's the future, like that it's been going on for 5 years. No, it hasn't. Right? Look, I get it. Now I'm going to sound like a Democratic politician because I think this was the problem with the platform that they ran on. Right? This notion that things have universally been bad in the US from an economic perspective, absolutely untrue. The fact of the matter is, some people are going to hate to hear it, but the fact of the matter is, for this console generation, covering the pandemic, there were a lot of people in a lot of certain classes that did just fine. There were a lot of people that actually went upside, right? There were a lot of people who were negatively impacted, right? People whose jobs were dependent upon environments where social distancing wasn't really feasible, right? But tons of people in tech, even my brothers in tech who have to work in certain facilities, right? And those facilities can't be unmanned. We all did well. And in fact, improved and made out. There is a reason why people had disposable income to fatten the gaming industry up while people had to stay at home. Like, I get it. Like, yes, some of that money was alleviated because you weren't spending money on gas, and you weren't paying for car maintenance and something like that. But that's not the entirety of the story, right? Lots of people either were in jobs or maneuvered into jobs where their quality of life increased. They were able to work from home. Tech companies like went on hiring sprees, as you saw. We see the evidence of that because of the huge layoffs. That means people were hired. You can't lay off the hundreds. You can't lay off the if you didn't hire them in the first place, right? So there's a reason why the gaming industry got fat during the pandemic. And there are people, like I said, that made out well. Now, there are a lot of people who didn't. But the fact of the matter is that we have been in a rich session for the last 5-ish years. Right? We have been in a period where at a certain cutoff point within the economy in America, there are people who made out well and at least maintained what they had if they didn't improve. Right? And those people spent money.
You still Logic? Are you walking off the altar?
I'm gonna go over here and sit down in the pulpit and wipe my brow a little bit, drink me some water. But
no, come back up.
We're not done for tonight.
Yeah, no. It's interesting. I brought this article here I'm sharing on the screen. PricewaterhouseCoopers, which is one of the big 4 public accounting firms. They do a lot of analysis work. This would have probably come from their advisory group. But it's interesting. Again, the talk around exclusivity. Someone, I don't know if we'll have time to bring up this video, but somebody actually did a video about a tweet that I put up a couple weeks ago. Maybe it was 2 weeks ago. I don't remember, 2 or 3 weeks ago, about exclusivity. And I think where people get tripped up, Logic, people are saying, well, exclusivity is dead. PlayStation has their games on PC. There's no such thing as exclusivity anymore. Nintendo has brought some of their IPs onto mobile. I think there's a I don't know if it's still on mobile. I have to go look. But there was a Mario game that was on mobile as well. It's actually pretty good.
Yeah, they put several games on mobile, and then I wouldn't necessarily say that they failed, but a lot of this was kind of in the late teens. But a lot of them didn't do what Nintendo wanted to do, and by the time it was all over, there were two that they were kind of actively maintaining, and I'm not actually sure that those two are still being published and available. But the last two were like I think a paid Fire Emblem game, I think. And a Mario Kart, like Mario Kart.
There's Super
World Tour
Mario
or something like that.
Yeah, Mario Kart Tour, and there's Super Mario Run. Those are the two games that I'm seeing on the Google Play Store. So they've brought, again, two games, but they have kind of crossed over, brought some of their IPs to another platform, mobile. Again, but we don't look at Nintendo and say Nintendo doesn't have any exclusives anymore. People don't bring Nintendo in the argument, and we're not doing that anymore. By the way, we're not excluding Nintendo from the argument anymore.
BRAP, if we were going to talk about Nintendo no longer doing exclusives, we should have started that dialogue in the 90s. Because in the 90s, Nintendo entered into a licensing deal with Philips to allow Nintendo IP to be placed on the Philips CDI. And so on the CDI, there was Link: The Faces of Evil, Zelda: The Wand of Gamelon, and Zelda's Adventure, as well as Hotel Mario.
Mm-hmm.
So all this running around and wagging fingers and saying, "Oh, PlayStation's going multi-platform. It's over. Exclusives are dead." Why weren't we having that conversation in the 90s?
Well, you know why?
Because there was no Xbox to have their feelings hurt. And because Sega people didn't cut the fool like some of these Xbox people do.
No.
Right. And because there wasn't social media.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a negative part of the formula.
People weren't politicking. And PlayStation, to Josh Ayer's part, PlayStation Sony put the games on PC in the 90s as well. So that's not the idea of PlayStation putting their games on the platforms isn't totally new. And then I wonder how much I think some of these people are probably newer to gaming, don't have that historical perspective that we have. But I'll play devil's advocate here. I'll give them a little bit of I don't want to say credit because they don't deserve credit. But I'll say, like, in the traditional sense, as people think of exclusives in a complete walled garden, you and I talked about this. Has PlayStation, Nintendo have both. They still have that wall up. I think you said this, Logic, but now they've added maybe a window or two.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, like this is where the delta is for me, and it goes along with what I talked about in the first lesson and the second lesson and the gospel, right? There's a difference in the way that they're going about it that's impactful. So today, let's talk about PlayStation, since everybody likes to talk about PlayStation. PlayStation builds a game. They focus on building that game on top of their PlayStation proprietary abstraction layer, deploying it to their hardware, utilizing their proprietary upscaler, right? And then when that team is finished with that game, when that game is complete, not limit, maybe today, maybe it's near complete, right? Because we know that hardware optimization is a large part of what comes at the end of the development cycle. And if that team, that first party team, if the hardware optimization they're doing is for the PlayStation 5, the Nixus can go ahead and get that handoff of that build, because what they're doing for hardware optimization on PlayStation 5 probably doesn't largely impact them. Right? So maybe the handoff occurs at 92% complete, 93% complete, whatever you want to call it, 88% complete. But the point is that team doesn't get their hands dirty, for the most part, with anything worried about getting that game onto another platform. They focus on getting that game to work as best as it possibly can on PlayStation. And then they hand it off to Nixes or Bluepoint or Iron Galaxies. Right? And then they are largely, as far as we know, as far as we can tell, that first party studio is largely in a consultant role. Right? Hey, I open, hey, I unpack this library and there's this file missing, right? Or whatever. Maybe there's some direct labor taking place. But the point is that the large part of the LOE, the investment strategy, is focused on first delivery on PlayStation, and then it goes over right to a port specialist to do it. And it's a port. So let's talk about another thing. If you are running a business, a development shop, where a game goes to the other console in a 3 to 6 month delay, you're not doing a port. You're doing concurrent development. There's some parallelism taking place right in your project schedule. There was some allocation of resources, and you're not handing it off. Right now, for later ports, Xbox is going to some studio. They went to Virtuos for the Elder Scrolls remaster. I can't remember the name of the studio that actually did the Forza Horizon 5 port, right? But that was to take care of games that they kind of had in the production pipeline backlog. But today, right, where those games are going to the other platform 3 to 6 months later, in most cases, it appears that the pattern that's being set is that it's concurrent development going on. And they're emphasizing everybody getting off of proprietary in-house studio engines and moving to Unreal Engine 5. That is a significant departure and difference from the program execution model that's going on at PlayStation. And obviously wildly different from what's going on at Nintendo. So again, I go back to, why are there some of us that are okay with and want and are interested in exclusives continuing? Because we want high quality games. A third of the games, and I didn't get a chance to punch the other 4 award shows, right? But a third of the games over the last decade have been exclusives. I don't want a third of the games taken off the table, right? That constitute high quality releases. I don't want good enough games. I don't want low price technically acceptable. If I did, I could have just stayed at home and worked. I didn't need to go to college. I didn't need to go get 3 degrees. I didn't need to spend 20, 30 years in a STEM field. I didn't need to move into management. Right? And those are the demographics. Those are some of the demographics, right? That populate part of the addressable market of this industry. People who want high quality stuff. It's not just because PlayStation.
Yeah, no, it isn't just because of PlayStation, and it's what's frustrating for me too is that people don't understand basic economics, right? Supply and demand, and this is what I try to. This is why I brought up the Nike analogy, right? And the Air Jordan brand, and how consumers associate quality with certain brands or exclusivity with certain brands, and how that creates a sense of value or ROI for these consumers, right? You spend a lot of money in something, you want some kind of ROI. You want to feel like you want your purchase, you want to validate that purchase, right? We a lot of us do this. And so what's frustrating too is that they don't recognize that they're different consumers in the market. Just like any other consumer product, right? You have a segment of consumers who buy Air Jordans. B Money will buy a lot of Air Jordans. BRAP won't, right? Because I don't value the Air Jordan brand as much as B Money does, right? But I bring that point up, and I try to make this as simple as possible. I know people aren't going. There's going to be some people that aren't going to get. Shoes aren't the same. You can buy them anywhere. That's not the point. The point is that the consumers have different wants, different needs, different requirements. And that's and this kind of like, for me, this ties back to choice, right? As consumers, we all have different requirements, different wants, different needs, whatever. And I feel, as somebody who's gamed for 40 plus years now, that we're in a place, the industry at least, where there's a lot of choice. There's enough of that pie to go around. I think I've talked about this on the show too, where I think Nintendo, PlayStation, and Xbox can do well. They can do well. They can cater to the different consumers that I'm talking about who have different requirements. And to your point about choice, Logic, that's a good thing. That's a great thing to have right now. That you have 3 different platforms: Nintendo, PlayStation, and Xbox. They're offering some. There's some similarities. There's also some differences, some key differences, and those things are actually good for consumers. Nate Dogg, we're gonna have security escort you out of the church here in just a second. Posting that nonsense here in the live chat. You've been warned. But I want to go back to this article, Logic. Platforms are aggressively pursuing IP. This was analysis by PwC. All right. And again, we try to incorporate data analysis, things like that, in our discussions here, BRAP. So one of my takeaways from this analysis by PwC, and what's the title of this again? It's Top 5 Developments Driving Growth for Video Games. One of the things I saw that I thought was interesting was platforms are aggressively pursuing IP. And if you follow me on Twitter, you've heard me refer to PlayStation as more than a console. It's a platform now, right? Logic, I do want to talk about Mal as well. So when you're ready to come back on,
we've got a
onto
I
the
wanna, I mean, I know
back onto the altar.
I know you were doing your thing, but I need to tighten that math up a little bit.
Yeah, because I think that's, people are really conflating or don't understand Mao. But if you've been following me on Twitter, if you listen to the show, I've often referred to PlayStation, Nintendo as platforms, right? They have become these living, breathing ecosystems. And what I thought was interesting about this PwC analysis is that it says the game industry is in a late stage gold rush for premium intellectual property. This sets the stage for future with platforms. This sets the stage for a future with platforms having their own exclusive games, just as video streaming services have exclusive shows. Major players are making big acquisitions of premium IP, signaling their their expectations that content and game titles will be differentiators, the keys to market success. While publishers remain incentivized to make games available across devices, streaming devices could make bulky devices like PCs and consoles obsolete. I think I want to preface that's probably more future, right? Down the future, who knows, 20, 30 years from now. Publishers would have to rely on device gatekeepers to get their games into players' hands. And this is the thing that people often say, well, it's the old way, right? Oh, that's the old way. Okay, well, what do you project? What is the new way then? Right? Because if the new way is cloud, because that was the other argument when Microsoft was pushing cloud, and I've shared this with you, Logic. I've been here on I've been podcasting since 2015, 10 years now. This is our 10th anniversary, by the way, of BRAP. And so I've seen all the narratives, all the back and forth, this is the future of gaming. Oh, by the way, to your point, mobile is going to kill consoles. That's not new. That was Michael Pachter, pre Xbox One, PlayStation 4 generation. He was actually out there saying that this, in fact, was going to happen. Of course, it didn't. But if people are talking about the old way, and everything goes into streaming or the cloud, because I've heard that argument, everything's going to go cloud. And let's say PlayStation and Nintendo become these applications, these apps on our television sets or mobile devices. Then what's going to be the differentiator for those for them? Much like Netflix, much like HBO Max, It's going to be content. It's going to be content.
And BRAP, can you platform? Can you found? Would you want to base a TV or a movie property on a crappy game?
No.
Would you want to even do so on a mid game?
No, you were good. No, why you want you want something that has value that people associate with quality. That there's a fan, there's a group of consumers that are I don't want to say rabid over a particular IP.
I think it was IP to be a seminal award-winning IP.
Yeah,
that probably gives you a very solid foundation to launch the IP right into a different media format and channel.
Well, I mean, Nintendo's doing this right now. Microsoft has done this. PlayStation has done this with The Last of Us, and then you see the impact of. We talked about the metaverse. I think we talked about this maybe last week. I think people often forget that word, but this, to me, this goes back to leveraging IP on other platforms, right? To generate additional revenue off that IP, which makes it more valuable, right? And then on the flip side of that, there's a downstream impact to the gaming ecosystem. And we saw this with The Last of Us. We saw this with Fallout, where there was a bump in sales for those games. So look, I don't buy, and I said this to you before, Logic, I don't buy the idea that exclusives are going away. I know someone argued with me, the gentleman who was trying to get on the show today, said, oh, what do you mean exclusives? Sony doesn't have exclusives, they're on PC. Sony actually still has exclusives. You can't. I mean, if you want to argue semantics here, but you can't actually play The Last of Us on Xbox or Nintendo on a competing platform. And then even on the PC side, it's not day and days; it's staggered. And even some of the releases are limited there. But even the intent. And PlayStation's talked about this for releasing their games on PC, is with the idea of hopefully grabbing people from the PC to go out and do what? Buy a PlayStation 5, and then have those people invest in the ecosystem to use that storefront to buy games, which they get that 30% cut. And then they're going to go out like Hero Down Under because they bought Ghost of Yote. They bought Ghost of Tsushima on PC. Now Yote's coming out, and FOMO's real. They're excited about this new release of Ghost of Yote, and they're like, oh shit, I don't want to wait. I don't want to wait a year, 6 months, or whatever the case is to play the next Ghost game because I love Ghost of Tsushima on PC. I'm going to go out and buy a PlayStation now. So, I would encourage anyone who's interested you can Google this, Google PwC's top five development driving growth for video games. Actually, it's a pretty good read. And there's a lot of other stuff you can pull up that analysts have put out, have put together. And actually, this is an interesting graph here. You look at PC and console. They talk about the market spend opportunity. This is back to 2023. They talk about game tech innovators boosting profitability, players experience, talk about AI. So definitely, I would encourage anyone who's interested to take a read. It's a pretty good read.
So we're going to add on a little bit right to the consumer piece and how we were talking about hardware. So again,
yep.
I think the conversation hyper focuses on exclusives and in the as in terms of a title that is tightly coupled to a singular hardware platform. And I think that is largely a conversation about brands, right? And the desire to see for one's, chosen brand to be seen, right, as superior. Right. But like I said, weeks and weeks ago, right, there are those of us who put value on exclusives because exclusives, I mean, as I've been talking about tonight, are really just a subset, right, of anything that is done to allow a development team to be hyper-focused on a singular or minimized hardware set, right? And we don't just have this on console. We have this on PC as well. Incredibly flabbergasted that we don't understand that Xbox, right, the corporation that talks about putting games everywhere, unchaining games, like equality amongst players, second class, no second class, all this stuff, and id developed and right, id developed, Bethesda published Doom the Dark Ages this year. And what is the nit with Doom the Dark Ages? It requires hardware ray tracing. It is not optional. You must have a GPU that is capable of doing hardware ray tracing. So you have to have a 2000 or 3000 series card. And even if you have a 2000 or 3000 series RTX card, you can also have a Radeon card that's capable of ray tracing. Right? There are cards, SKUs within those series that still struggle with that game.
Hold on, Hamp. I don't mean to interrupt here. So VG Flight School's in here, and he says, what is the new way? And VG, if you want to jump in, I can send you, I don't know if you're on X, if you want to jump in, I can send you an invite to the show. He says, what's the new way? You say tonight wasn't convenient. Sell software. That in fact is true for Xbox, because they have pivoted their model. But in fact, to an extent, that's not their, okay, let me, that's not completely their entire model. The other part of their model is to sell you a subscription service called Game Pass. And I would argue that's probably ideally where they want to push you, because the recurring revenue opportunity for them there. But PlayStation isn't just selling software. They're selling an ecosystem. The software is one part of that ecosystem, VG Flight School. And that's the point I was trying to make to you in the video that you made. Thank you for the advertisement of the show, though. I appreciate that. But that's the point that I was trying to drive home. It's no different than Apple. When Apple's selling you the ecosystem, Logic mentioned the phone, right? They want you to buy additional accessories, additional things that are specific to the Apple ecosystem that you can't get anywhere else, right? So it isn't about selling software on other platforms. Yeah, and I said this earlier, VG Flight School, you probably weren't here. Yeah, you could sell, The Last of Us on Xbox and Nintendo Switch, and there might be a short-term boost, but the long-term isn't as valuable to Sony, because Sony's looking to get you into their ecosystem. So now you're buying from their storefront, where they also get that 30% cut, where they're now also selling you, Hero Down Under mentioned that new Ghost of Yotei Blade, or that special edition console, or now you're on your third PlayStation 5, right? Because you bought a PlayStation 5, or your second PlayStation 5, because you bought the launch PlayStation 5. And then you could be on your third because maybe you got the Slim, and then you decided to upgrade to the PS5 Pro, right? And where it makes sense for them, and this is where people get, I think, tripped up here, Logic. And look at Helldivers. Well, yeah, Helldivers makes sense. It's a live service game. The benefit to Helldivers is that because it's a live service game, it's not tied to that storefront. Where single player games tied to that storefront, they can't monetize. You can't monetize anymore outside of that storefront a single player game. When you have a live service game, they can continually monetize you without being in the ecosystem. That is why a live service game in this instance makes sense to put on a Nintendo Switch or an Xbox.
I think
the new way, Logic, is selling the ecosystem, the experience of the ecosystem, and getting you locked in. I talked about that ecosystem stickiness, and then also try to get new people in that ecosystem to spend more money. And I think this is going to go. I think Logic. This I think this might be a good segue to Mao when you're done. And I know I interrupted you.
No, that's right.
What you were saying. But,
so I think the last thing I want to drag back into this, right, is also this conflation that that gamers on PC are against exclusives, or the conflation of two populations that where one is against exclusives versus one that doesn't care about exclusives. Those are not synonymous, right? I would contend that the vast majority of players on PC, it's not that they're against exclusives, it's that they don't care.
Well, logic, but this goes back to that consumer has a different set of requirements.
Exactly. And as I often talk about, right? Gamers on PC, we're not looking over our shoulder, right? Concerned, wrapped around the axle, fearful about what PlayStation players are getting, what Xbox players are getting, what Nintendo players are getting. Right? If we do, we'll go buy those consoles. But most of your people who are on PC are on PC because they made a conscious choice that that's where they need to be. And those games that are exclusive on other platforms weren't of high enough value to them. Games started being ported over to PC. We also conflate that consumption through opportunity versus actual. I would say demand, but it's hard to articulate, right? The difference that I'm talking about. There weren't people on PC yelling, screaming, clamoring that it was criminal for PlayStation to not put its games over on PC. When those games showed up, they were consumed because they were available, because the opportunity was there. That's not the same thing as yelling and screaming, right? That all games should be free, that games shouldn't be exclusives. And so taking that population of PC gamer and asserting that those people are against the notion of exclusives just isn't true. So I've talked a lot tonight about how we mix up and conflate the notions of covariance and causality. But I do want to say that on this show, we're not making that conflation, right? Those are two different things. So the bit you were talking about earlier about Mao, right? And I wrote this up maybe last week. It's not very long, right? But it's very, very quickly, right? Actually, I'll bolt a piece onto it that I wrote this week. So this whole thing about Mao, and where I've talked about, it's not Mao. The focus should probably be on ARPU. Like I said earlier, I've also been adding in the notion of CLV, right? Customer lifetime value. And that goes back to the piece you were talking about, BRAP, which is that, hey, right now, right, the only way to get to the PlayStation storefront is via a piece of PlayStation hardware. So there's an increased CLV that comes from a person who purchases that access point and therefore is incentivized to actively participate in the ecosystem through that revenue generation store point. I've also written in recent weeks how this whole notion of exclusives and hardware agnosticism and a lot of the other things that we talk about on platforms, the war coming, right? The real war in the future is going to be over storefronts. That is the crown jewel, right, in the ecosystem now. And we actually need to start kind of decomposing differently how we talk about a console platform.
I think it's also important to, we talk about these the digital storefront, right, and how that's potentially the new battleground. You look at, let me know what you think, Logic, but I think when you look at Microsoft's investments in the studio acquisitions, that's part of that, right? But the other thing too is we have to remember something. Like, these storefronts play a pivotal role in the distribution of software for third-party developers. There's that symbiotic relationship. I don't think people think about that.
I mean, that is, for the most part, that is the delivery mechanism, right?
Yeah, exactly. So you have Nintendo, PlayStation and Xbox on the console side, and PC primarily, you have Steam and Epic and some others, but Steam's the dominant player in that space, right? But that's, so there's that symbiotic relationship that I don't think people think about. And so PlayStation and Xbox and Nintendo, they see the value in that storefront. So how else do they drive consumers to that storefront? Product differentiation, exclusives. But sorry, go ahead, Roger.
And a good litmus test and proof point of that is, right, and we talked about this years ago, right? Apple and Google make a crap ton of money in the gaming industry, and they don't lift a finger. right? How do they do that? They do that because they own the digital storefronts through which people have to go through in order to access content. And they actually generate more revenue from that than some third-party video game publishers on console and PC. So just going back to that part about MAU and ARPU, right? So an Xbox consumer, right, based on their $24.5 billion of annual revenue and their 500 million MAU, right, has an ARPU of about $49. On PlayStation, that ARPU, for $31.5 billion of annual revenue and 124 million or so active users, right, per month, is about 249, 250, 253, something like that. 240, let's call it 250, right? So that's the difference, right? That categorizes the difference in how those corporations see their consumer base, right? And the strategies that they would therefore, right, try and affect. Also points out, right, some of the things that we've been talking about, right, about what makes sense for companies in the decisions that they make versus between PlayStation and Xbox when your demographics for your addressable market are that different, right, for your user install base. Now, what I will say is an interesting thing that I thought about this week is that if you're a Game Pass Ultimate subscriber and you're paying the $20 a month and you're not taking, $1 deals, or you're not stacked, or, you're not, buying hardware and taking your 3-month, Game Pass, whatever, redemption card or whatever that comes in the box, you're actually paying at least $240 a year. And you're probably buying additional games on top of that. So I think one of the things that, eventually we'll need to talk about and maybe decompose more and dig into more is that I think part of the reality, and this goes into like a lot of the social discourse about, like 2 weeks ago, there were vigorous arguments about Xbox gamers do play games, right? Do buy games, right? That old argument. Then this week, when the Machine Games design director, right, made the comment on the Game Business Show about, we know the behavior of Game Pass players, they dip into a game for 5 minutes and they dip out. Then there was this huge defense force erected around, well, we should have known that's always been the case. We've never said anything different. No, like actually, like your voice track now about, yes, we know that that's how people behave. And your voice track 2 weeks ago that Xbox gamers do play games. Xbox gamers do buy games. Here's my wall of games that I bought. Those two dialogues are actually in conflict. Right? They don't true up, particularly when you don't cinch them together and talk about why there are differences in that voice track. But at any rate, my point is that I think the way I visualize the Xbox consumer base, right, 30 million users on console or whatever, is that there is a highly concentrated nucleus of big spenders, whales, right, that are subscribed to Game Pass, that don't churn, right, that pay in, that spend money on games, spend a ton of money on games, and probably if I separated those statistics, right, they would their ARPU would be super high, right? It would definitely exceed the ARPU of your average PlayStation consumer, right? But then I think you have a very large number that far outnumbers them of people who are hardly spending any money, and that's probably what that bell curve actually looks like, which again I think will make differences, right, in the way Xbox runs their business.
We grab the super chat here. Dryad Chisel with the $5 super chat says, love the discussion. Any chance y'all will discuss Tim Sweeney's defense of Unreal Engine 5 and developer misaligned priorities when it comes to optimization? I don't think on this show, but I did see that tweet though by Tim Sweeney. It was a couple weeks ago that came out. I don't know. Maybe that's something. Maybe I don't know. What do you think, Logic? Is that something you might want to tackle? Not on this show tonight, but maybe a different night.
I mean, I don't think it's not a huge topic to break apart, and I don't know that I necessarily agree with him. I mean, his contention was that the problem is the development process, that most of those developers, focus on PC first, and then also target higher end hardware, and then try and scale it down for the lower end hardware and wind up getting themselves right into problems. So, it's an opinion.
The Indiana Jones thing, Xbox Game Pass was a hard balance because players quickly drop out, and that was machine games. And again, I'm going to call the sinners out since we're at church. And I saw Boomstick's reply to Chris String, accusing him of engagement farming and I forget, maybe lying. I think. I wish, this is part of my frustration with content creators like Boom. They don't bother reading. They don't bother. They just react. It's just this emotional reaction without actually reading the actual article, right? Pure Xbox actually published the article too. So I don't, it's really unfortunate that the conversation in gaming gets dumbed down by people like Boomstick, who get upset and lash out at Chris String and make these wild accusations when in fact it wasn't Chris making this up. It was actually Microsoft's own developer that said this. Balaji, I want to go back to ARPU because I don't know. I don't think people understand average revenue per user. People are lost in MAU. And I know you gave that example of, what was it, 100? I forget the number you gave. You broke down the spend on PlayStation, I think, versus Xbox. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, so your ARPU on Xbox is probably about $49, and your ARPU on PlayStation is like $250. So, and really, what I'm really talking with them when I talked about how I imagine those demographics are spread, then what I'm really talking about is ARPU, right? Which is average revenue per paying user, which is another metric that is looked at in the gaming industry and in service industries, right? Which is, again, that is the direct acknowledgement that you probably have amongst your clientele, a certain group of people who are spending more money and a certain group of people who are spending like significantly less money. So in my point has also been like, it's not even then just ARPU, right? It's that at a certain point, right, the consumers that I care about are the consumers that I have that are spending money. We have this talk in business of what we call them is consumers who have champagne tastes on a beer budget, right? And when you talk about business strategy and the type of return customer you're trying to cultivate, you don't necessarily, there are businesses who have a strategy that they don't want that type of consumer, right? Like, again, the Apple example. Apple is making some low-end SKUs now, right? They're making the MacBook Air. They are making the iPhone SE, right? They make the Watch SE. So there are some lower SKUs. Like, there's like one SKU in each product line. That's like the lowest one, right? And if you look at Apple, if you look at Apple data, what you'll also find out is, I think part of their willingness and why they've been willing to do that is that those actually aren't the things that sell the most. When the iPhone goes live next week, I can almost guarantee, because it's almost this way almost every single time, the thing that's going to sell like hotcakes is the Pro Max. So Apple doesn't need, it's taken a while for their business to get there. It's taken a while for it to become like a self-sustaining, mature kind of business and productization, right? But Apple's not worried about cannibalizing sales by selling, right, SEs or the MacBook Air, because they have a clientele that if they're going to buy a MacBook, they're going to buy the high-end MacBook. Why was it okay for them to bring the MacBook Air back, right, and to redesign it, to actually make it a little more powerful, right? The MacBook Air M4, which is the one I have, a M4 and an M3. Right, they're great devices. They don't provide all the niceties, right, as some of the other things. I mean, number one, economic environment, right? Things getting harder, and right, people getting tighter with money, sure. But part of the reason they were willing to do that is because they saw that it wouldn't necessarily be a threat to cannibalizing sales of their higher end SKUs. So what does that tell us? That tells us Apple has cultivated a consumer base that has become accustomed, trained, if you will, right, to buying their high-end hardware, buying it in droves, and they can now lean on that. Do you think that maybe just maybe PlayStation has kind of tried to do the same thing?
I would say yes, they absolutely have, and you see that based on their product releases and how they create these curated, these high level, they put out these high production AAA experiences that you can't get anywhere else, first party experiences you can't get anywhere else. So yeah, they absolutely have. You have the PlayStation 5 Pro. You have the DualSense Edge. You have the what are the earbuds that are expensive for, or not the headphones? They're
Pulse Explorer.
Yeah.
Mine are sitting right over there on the table.
I've always argued that I believe PlayStation is more Apple-esque in how they approach the gaming industry, or their approach to the gaming industry. And again, that's the thing that, again, when people are having this conversation, they leave out the fact that, look, they're consumers that value these things. Not all of us want, pork bellies.
Pork bellies.
Yeah.
Not all of us want to eat a Golden Corral.
No. If you love Golden Corral, hey, great on you. I don't want Golden Corral. I want to go to Ruth Chris.
Yeah, and look, I get it. Like absolutely, and this is what we've tried to articulate tonight. And like this is the other thing that's the frustrating part of my right? On this show, we articulate the presence of multiple facets and multiple dynamics in the market, and we acknowledge their existence. Other places that you listen to and shows that you go to, I would contend, would have you believe that there's only one thing. Nobody wants exclusives. Exclusives are dying. They're zero value. No, I don't think that's the case. I think there's 150 million people on the Nintendo Switch platform that don't think that. Because those people don't have Call of Duty. Those people don't have Warzone. I don't think they're all over there just as a cheap way of accessing multiplayer games. I don't think that's where the center and the core of that user base is.
Yeah. I mean, I think, if you look at the PC market, right? Clearly there's a reason why the 4090 or the 90 series cards sell out, or why NVIDIA puts out 80 series, 70 series, 60 series cards.
I mean, if I give Tim Sweeney's statement any validation, right? It's why developers, right, spend some of their time focusing on those cards, because if they're going to put a $60 or $70 game right up on Steam, it's probably more likely that the person who is on PC who has spent money on their hardware, they are more likely to buy that game than the guy who's sitting on an 8 gigabyte GPU. Than the guy who hasn't upgraded like components in his system, than the guy who's running around who listened to one of you knuckleheads out here telling them they can build a $750 PC that is the same as a PS5 Pro. That's when you lied to them and told them to buy parts that were obsolete, and that's going to cost them twice as much to upgrade themselves out of.
And they realize they bought the wrong power supply. They can't power their PC.
Right, the developers know that the game that they're going to put out at launch probably is more appealing and is going to be bought by the person who spent money on hardware.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to go back to something you said, Logic. Like you talked about, like what we don't do on this show. We acknowledge the different dynamics in the market, right? And that's a great point, because the other shows that you might listen to, they don't do that. It's this is the future, this is the way, and that's it. Nothing. The idea of a consumer that has a different requirement doesn't exist, and that is patently false. It's disingenuous. It's a lie, and I don't know why people do that. You know, we don't come on the show. We never say that, you know, nobody wants a less powerful hybrid handheld console. We don't say that because clearly people do, because we see the Nintendo Switch, the success that it's having. We never say that, you know, nobody wants subscription services. That's not true because we see people engaging in subscription services.
We never say that nobody wants to stream their games.
Yeah.
Because it's apparently not true.
Yeah. Even though I don't want to stream games, I never project my requirements onto the rest of the market.
Right.
Or
at least we differ enough, and the guests that we bring through differ enough so that you hear those multiple perspectives. I was a founding subscriber to Google Stadia. It fulfilled a place in my ecosystem. The other thing I give credit to Google Stadia for, again, going back to talking about how we can talk about aspects of all platforms and all participants in the gaming market that have done positive things. And you don't come here to the show to hear, well, this platform has never done anything good. But you will absolutely hear that on other shows. Some of you guys who are Xbox fans should be thanking your lucky stars for Stadia, because Xbox didn't get off their butt about Xbox cloud gaming until Stadia was stood up and became a thing. That's what gave Xbox the push to get Xbox cloud gaming to become a truly viable service. So yeah, and again, this also goes back to, I don't want to drag him, and I'm not trying to do that, right? But this goes back to, you know, Christopher Drink's comment about, like, I'm pessimistic. And he's pessimistic about consoles. So yeah, I'm conflating a little bit, right? But we get a lot of this, I'm pessimistic about the gaming industry. There's no innovation. No, Google just tried to do Stadia and they failed. Right? And the domino effect of that is Xbox, right, got off their butt to do Xbox cloud gaming. And that's a positive thing for some consumers because some consumers want that. That has enabled this Samsung TV, right, arcade thing. Now, what I won't do is I won't sit here and say, like a lot of the other pundits will, that's the future, or that's optimal, or just good enough gaming is good enough. And that's what's appealing to everyone. But I will acknowledge that there's some part of the market, maybe single-digit percentages, who wants that thing. And we're going to start tripling and quadrupling down on how when you go outside the bounds of this show, outside the bounds of this network, outside the bounds of shows that are in this circle of trust and ring of truth, and you hear these narratives and you hear these agendas and you hear these one-sided perspectives and you hear these echo chambers and you hear the accusations that get thrown at us, we're going to start tripling down and quadrupling down about calling that out. Because it's other places that you go to hear that there's only one way of looking at it, that this is what's going to happen because it just makes sense. Because there's a silver bullet, because all you have to do is, if the gaming industry, if the gaming market were not incredibly complex and equivalently incredibly fascinating, if it were easy, if it were Lego blocks, we wouldn't have the metrics that we have of how many games never make it to retail, digital storefronts, of how many software projects fail. It's another core thing that's vastly misunderstood, is that this whole industry, this whole thing that we talk about, while it gets delivered to consumers and it gets talked about by lots of people, that is heavily founded on software engineering, and software development, software engineering operates vastly differently than hardware manufacturing does, right? Than other traditional services that we're aware of does. Radically differently. If I had to talk to you about the number of nights that I go out to my car and just sit, right, trying to think about what I actually accomplished during the day, because the thing that I work on is intangible, non-corporeal, that it's difficult to measure and quantify, that we've come up with ways on it, but it's very difficult for me to, at the end of the day, turn around and point at a thing and say, yeah, I did that, right? I achieved that, because it's not objective, right? You can't pick up code, right?
Yeah.
like this industry and the science it is built upon is radically different and is incredibly complex. And there's a ton of work that goes on that never yields an actual product.
There's a lot of games that don't make retail release, and people don't realize it. And that speaks to the complexity and the difficulty of the industry. You know, it isn't as simple as you put your games everywhere and then you're automatically profitable. You increase your profit margins. The other thing people don't, I think you talked about this earlier, Logic, that we're developing in parallel. It's an additional lift. That's an additional cost. You're introducing new cost of development now to development.
It's additional cost. It's additional level of effort. It's additional complexity. It's additional risk.
Yeah.
The percentage likelihood that things will go wrong increases.
Because you've introduced new variables into the equation.
Yeah. So this whole thing, it's become easy. It's automated. I'm like, you can have whatever opinion you want to about it. But what I'm no longer going to argue with people on is from a quantifiable perspective, it's not zero. And this is what I get to. When you go outside of this show, when you go outside of this ring, when you go outside of this circle, what you hear is that it's easy, it's inconsequential, it doesn't matter. And I'm going to talk to you about, as someone who works in software every day, that's an absolute bald-faced lie.
Yeah, I'm not even software, so I know that.
Otherwise, it wouldn't be the way that it is. There wouldn't be people, right, working on exclusive hardware. There wouldn't be developers complaining when they have to go to certain platforms.
Yeah.
And the challenges they introduce. There wouldn't be all these TechTuber podcasts that bitch about 8 gigabyte GPUs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree 110%, Logic. There was something else you said about what was it? The silver bullet, right? More games everywhere yields like success, right? That's almost like they almost make it sound like it's guaranteed. But then they fail to acknowledge or discuss the games that are multi-platform that don't perform well, or the countless number of third-party studios that have been shut down, right? Or popular IPs that are no longer released because they're no longer successful. And those are multi-platform releases, right? Oh, but if you release your game multi-plat, more revenue, it makes more sense. You're leaving money on the table, maybe.
But perhaps sometimes it's okay. Sometimes it's okay to leave money on the table, right? There are certain fallacies in industry. Key one, what the guy say in The Princess Bride? Never get involved in a land war in Asia.
Yes, right? He did say that.
There's certain fallacies in industry. And one of the key fallacies is we'll make it up on volume. Yeah, you don't actually ever make it up on volume, right? There's a thing that happens that's far more complex and complicated than that bumper sticker statement, right? But in general, you don't become successful in business by being a charity and giving stuff away for free, right? Just at volume. But the other thing that I think there's a fallacy is that the notion that it's, that leaving money on the table is always bad. It's not. I've talked about the story in my own management career of kind of when I had to learn the lesson that sometimes you just need to suck down your pride, and do something and do some things and work with companies, right, that you wouldn't want to do. But by the same token, there's also a flip side where you say, for instance, right, one of my other stories that I tell on this is like, look, we're not going to develop this feature for you. Like, I understand that you buy a certain number of licenses from us per year, but this thing is really complex, and nobody's asking for it but you, right? And if you were Pacific Gas and Electric, right, and you basically own the entire Western Seaboard for electrical distribution, okay, then there's a discussion. But when you're a small municipality, I don't know that juice is worth the squeeze for us. So it's not always a great idea to go chasing after pennies, right? That requires effort. But in software development, what I also talk about, and like people like to be dismissive of it, somebody buying your software title isn't an end game in today's industry, right? Not if you care about a reputation and you want return customers.
Mm-hmm.
When you sell a game, you've got to maintain it. You've got to improve it. Like, I don't know about you, but most of us in games, like we're not happy about a game that just lands and like there aren't patches and there aren't improvements. Monster Hunter Wilds from Capcom, one of the most successful third-party publishers in the industry, is whining and complaining and bitching because Monster Hunter Wilds is not selling well. Why is Monster Hunter Wilds not selling well? Why do they have months where Monster Hunter Rise, right, a previous software release from them, and Monster Hunter World almost match the sales that they're making of Monster Hunter Wilds? Because whatever they're doing, Monster Hunter Wilds has not been improved to the point where people see it as a wildly differentiated product from their past releases, and they see their past releases as equally attractive. So Capcom has deployed hardware. They've deployed it on every platform, and they're not done spending money to make people happy about that title. So what does that calculus look like? Well, one thing to consider is that if that title, and I'm not saying that this is what Capcom should have done, but I am saying this as a statement of math, right? Had Capcom only deployed that title to one platform, then A, their chances that it would have performed fine, right, from a hardware performance perspective, would have increased. Not saying they would have knocked it out of the park. That's a matter of team, talent, timing, resources, appetite for risk, right? What other distractions you have going on in the space, right? A huge formula, but it's part of the formula. Had they put it on one platform, they wouldn't have the amount of adversity that they have to get the game right now. And if they didn't make an immaculate delivery and they still had to maintain it, they'd only be maintaining it on one platform right now. Now, would that math have come out good for them from a profitability perspective? That I don't know. But I will say from a software engineering perspective, that's an absolute mathematical truth. And that's the calculus that developers and studios have to juggle and decide. And they're not all running the same formulas. They're not all calculating the same risk. Their costs aren't all the same. And that's why lots of them are making different decisions.
That's a great point, Logic, about the calculus, the risk. I mean, this holds true for companies. The amount of the type of resources they have, it's not all the same. And that's the oversimplification of the argument that everyone's playing on this equal playing field, or that the risk calculus is all the same, that the resources, it's not. It's just not. And that holds true for companies. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, that's the point. Like, look, again, I mean, I think we said it perfectly back at the beginning. I've been saying it ever since I've been on this show, right? Is that what's exciting to me about this generation, and is why I went back to consoles, is because each of these platform owners is going about their business in a different way and providing a wide degree of choice. And again, if the argument against exclusives, and this is your statement, so I'll admit that I'm kind of stealing it.
Yeah.
If the argument against exclusives was an economic one for the individual end user, for the consumer, if there were people saying, hey, look, like, I get it, the times are hard. I've capped out, right? Salary rate, my salary increases aren't keeping up with, cost of living. I can only afford to spend one $500 box. The more of these games that are cross-platform, that are ports, that are non-exclusive, that come to my platform, the better off I am. I totally understand that argument, and that demographic exists out there, right? I don't know how huge they are, but that demographic exists. Now, what I personally think is that there are lots of consumers who understand that that's the state of the industry, and they go into GameStop and they go into Best Buy, and understanding that they have to make choices, they make a choice. And I believe by and large, most of them are okay with that choice because nobody held a gun to their head and told them to buy a platform. I hope and believe that most of them weren't lied to about what platform they should go to. And they made a choice. And they knew what content was going to be available based on that choice. I don't subscribe to Netflix and then get angry that MCU movies aren't on Netflix. Right?
Yeah, or that The Last of Us or that Game of Thrones isn't on Netflix.
Right. Yeah. I mean, sometimes, and by the same token, there are some consumers out there who aren't. Yeah, yay, verily. I totally admit. There's some consumers who go and they buy a PlayStation, and they're like, "Hey, I saw that game Avowed. I'd really like to play it." And they get told that Avowed's not on PlayStation. And they're like, "Hey, what the f?"
Yeah, what the f? Yeah.
But I mean, I would also say that probably happens to you one or two times, and then you get it, right? But I believe the vast majority of people, and I think I wrote this and I said it on Twitter this week. I think the vast majority of people, like the real market, go and they make their decision and they buy a console because I think they're accustomed to going out and procuring things on a capitalist market. They understand that they're not in a Marxist economy, right? They go and they do things and they understand that. Right,
some people arguing for a Marxist economy, in my opinion.
they understand.
The Bolsheviks are trying to take over gaming.
Right? They go some places. They understand that they have choices. Look,
well, that's the thing we should be celebrating, though. Logic, like it goes, and this is the part that, like, and I to your, I know you mentioned that you borrowed something that I've been saying. Like I would have an issue if someone said, you know what, I understand others value exclusives. I don't value them because of the costs associated with exclusives.
Absolutely.
Or having to buy multiple, sets of hardware or different systems. I like 100%. I agree. That's fair. But to label and say, well, exclusives don't matter anymore. Everyone's going multi-plat. That's the future. I don't buy that narrative because that narrative wasn't something that was, I don't think, born out of any grassroots movement that I'm aware of. It was born out of a particular company pivoting and the head of that company changing the narrative and then following lockstep. Like I just don't, I don't buy that. It's to Colin Moriarty talked about, it feels very manufactured.
BRAP, are you able to hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
So, the other thing that goes along with that and where themselves is that's not where the conversation stops. Right?
Well, Logic, you start a bot now a little bit.
That's weird because actually you sound fine now.
Yeah, but you sound like you're botting. You see, like it's like staticky. I should probably say it's like static on your end.
Okay. Let me real quick.
Yep. All right. Logic will be back. Yeah, like I wouldn't have an issue if that argument was based on like the example I just gave, you know. And I think in part that's part of it. I mean, I've heard people say, well, look, I don't want to have to buy a $500 console. I get that. I totally get that. And actually, and if the price of consoles does continue to go up, we actually many of us may be facing that choice down the road. Some of us who were multi-console owners may now have to make a different choice because maybe the cost associated with buying multiple consoles just maybe doesn't make sense anymore. Let me get Logic back in here. All right, Logic.
Yeah, can you hear me okay now?
Oh yeah, now you're great. Yeah, you're good now.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to get a new Elgato XLR mixer.
Okay.
So it might be dying or something going on. But what I was saying,
they should give you a new one.
But what I was saying before, hey, crazy thing, right? Elgato makes these pieces of hardware, and the software that comes with them is an exclusive. But
software should be elsewhere.
but my thing
They're
is too,
leaving money on the table.
Yeah. The thing you mentioned earlier, right, about like, it's the argument is like exclusives don't matter. There's like, even that to an extent, I would buy almost, right, if they had an argument for it. But the thing is that's not where the conversation stops.
Okay, so like I wouldn't, I can't even, like, if people say I don't even give that any like I won't even acknowledge it anymore, because it's not coming. I don't think it's coming from I don't think it's a genuine argument for many people.
Well, that's my thing, and they prove that the moment that they say, well, the only reason you want exclusives is because you're a pony, right? Or I know this is going to hurt ponies' feelings, right? I know this is going to hurt PlayStation fans' feelings, right?
Exactly, yeah.
That's but like what you out is that is part of the reason you're making the argument.
Yeah, but the other thing is we have data that shows that that consumers do value exclusives. We talked about Spider-Man charting Circana. Ghost of Yote will chart Circana. Nintendo charts Circana. Xbox has Grounded 2, which is exclusive right now, to chart at Circana. I mean, exclusives matter. Exclusives are a thing that drive people to the ecosystem, that keep people within ecosystems. I mean, this is like, we don't have this argument over Apple. Apple needs to bring their AI and Siri over to Google because they're leaving money on the table. We don't have that argument. Or McDonald's could sell more Big Macs if they sold them at Burger King. They're leaving money on the table. We don't have that argument.
Or you bring up actual good historical context, right? We actually did used to have that argument, right, to a certain extent.
I don't remember having an argument.
Well, there were back to the Apple thing. There were absolutely arguments that used to be had that, hey, Apple should unlock, right, macro OS, like, because
yes, that's
Apple
true.
used to let you allow you to build. Do we call them like a Franken box? Or God, I can't remember what we used to refer to them as, right? But it was also this whole days of like where Apple would allow boot camping, right, of Windows on their hardware. They don't allow that stuff anymore. And I don't think, a Franken Mac. I think maybe that's what we used to call it. And you could absolutely build a Franken Mac. And I don't think you can do that today anyway. At least not as readily, easily as you could before. So we had those arguments, and Apple decided no. Right? And as we constantly talk about on the show, nobody's yelling. I mean, maybe they are, but at least definitely not at the same volume. And there aren't these internet Teutonic knights riding around saying, well, I'm advocating for the consumer, right? For Apple to tear the wall down and let its operating system sit on other hardware.
You know what, Ham? Let's look. They're not advocating for consumers. They're advocating for their narrative.
They're advocating for themselves.
Yeah.
And they're pandering to a crowd that they think will give them attention and will give them the followership, right? And will give them the ego boost that they need. And they didn't start saying these things until Phil Spencer flipped the script. Here's my other problem with this notion. You can go back to as far back as 2015, maybe 2014, and see and read instances of Phil Spencer talking about Xbox not having a priority on exclusives, about exclusives not being helpful, about games needing to be everywhere. So I'll definitely concur with the notion that, like, yeah, he's been telling you the full time, but it did not become a political and religious platform for that community until post Mea Culpa, right? The Mea Culpa tour, and then also the arm twisting, right, and the kicking in the pants to start putting their titles on other platforms. Right in the beginning of the no red line.
Well, what's interesting, Logic? The beginning of the no red line. It's interesting. I was just thinking about this. The counter argument that I often hear is, why aren't you okay with people having more games? That's kind of like the fallback argument.
People have too many games as it is.
But that's the argument. It's like, okay, well, what's wrong with more people with people having more access to more games or exclusive games? That's good for gamers.
And this is my response to that narrative.
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with people having access to more games. I have a problem with the squeegeeing out and the draining of quality out of the supply inventory that is put on the digital shelves each year. Again, if PlayStation wants to take its games after they're completed and hand them over to Nixxes, Iron Galaxies, and Bluepoint and distribute them to whatever platform they want, I don't have a problem with that. This is my other. Actually, let me roll back. Dude, now I'm getting pissed off at the question you asked me in the beginning. Right? Let's go back and one of the things we decouple on this show, and that I constantly decouple on my own show and my own content streams, is that you're going to hear three perspectives from me. Generally, you're going to hear how I think a thing will work out for the business. You're going to hear how I think a thing will work out and be accepted by the market at scale, not the fanboys and not the brand loyalists, but at scale, how the market's going to respond to something. And then, typically, not until you've asked me, you will hear what my own personal perspective is on a thing and how I feel about it as a gamer. I don't care about people on Xbox being able to play The Last of Us or not play The Last of Us or Spider-Man as a personal individual gamer. I said this a few weeks ago. This whole notion that somehow after no. Well, I'll just keep it to that somehow after decades, and I will assert vastly more than most other content creators that I know about and have heard of, and definitely more time on other platforms. And then when you add being a PC enthusiast and building PCs for close to 30 years now, right? The notion that I will somehow be challenged or will experience some type of adversity or have hurt feelings, as people like to term it, about games going to another platform, to me is laughable. Absolutely laughable. I don't egotistical statement. I quite honestly, I don't know anyone better equipped than me to maneuver and traverse to wherever I need to be or want to be for games on platforms. I've given up platforms. People talk about vendor lock-in. People who know me know that I will drop a platform in a heartbeat. What's my statement that I always talk about, BRAP? Never get involved in a platform that you're not willing to walk away from in 30 seconds or less.
Yeah, exactly. Great nod to a great movie, by the way.
You know, I got pissed off at Apple in 2011 with the Apple Samsung lawsuit. I felt like Apple kind of crossed the line, and I dropped Apple products for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't like if somebody on Xbox can play The Last of Us, great. That doesn't personally bother me as a gamer. What I will get bothered by is what I feel will be a loss on the industry is if PlayStation starts retooling its entire agile release train, right, and CI/CD pipeline to move its development train over to UE5 and start producing games, because we will lose something special and unique out of the industry. Same thing for Nintendo.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree 110%.
We will start that slide towards commodity to where everything is the same.
And I go ahead.
And I know that there are Xbox people, right, who are concerned about this idea that we're spiraling towards a future where everything's going to be built on UE5 and everything's going to look and feel samey.
I don't want pork bellies.
And that's what we saw in the showcases from this year's Summer Game Fest. We saw a lot of games that were very samey.
Well,
and we were like, why is that? Oh, because like 70% of them are being built on UE5.
Well, I've said this, the concern we talk about the race to the bottom, right? And
Exactly.
I said this on this show, like that's actually not necessarily good when games become commodities, because that's what it is in the mobile space. And if there are no differentiators left, and the only differentiation is price, well, what do you think is going to happen? Like we saw this in the mobile space. Like mobile games used to be like $9, $10, whatever the case is. Now they're all like $1.50.
Go,
You know,
go to a mobile store and tell me. Well, go to Android and tell me mostly how many games you find. Right, you're looking for a game. How many other dozen games you find that are like named the same, but just have one word swapped.
Oh yeah, a lot of them. I see it all the time, and they're heavily monetized with advertisements because now the differentiator is price, and these developers still need to make money. So if they can't get you up front, they're gonna sell advertising. This happened in the mobile space. Sell advertisement or figure out other ways to charge you more money. Microtransactions, you know, what is it? Was it gotcha games?
Yeah, the games with. I mean, yes, the games that have like 4 different currencies.
Yeah, I mean that's not what I want in the console space.
And we talk about, right, I've had this argument where, there are people who believe like, well, that'll never happen. Right. It's very interesting that I had this conversation today with this person who I took offense to it because initially it sounded like they were like, well, let me give you a history lesson. And I'm like, okay.
That's why I pulled up that chair, that chair gift, by the way. Because I was like, 70s and 80s. I don't know if this is the person you want to talk to about 70s and 80s.
Not only have I been around a long time gaming, but so correct me if I'm wrong, but you were an Xbox beta tester, right?
I actually was, yes. I helped. You see this on my Twitter profile. I actually helped build Xbox Live.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Hey, you're kind of like the PlayStation fans who helped PlayStation become what they are today and are now angry, right? If they put about them putting their games on PC. Because they're the ones that helped build the PlayStation brand.
Yeah, we helped you. I'm like, that is so ridiculous.
So lots of people don't.
Wait, to counterpoint to the PlayStation fans, no, not everyone values exclusives either, or high end AAA over the shoulder, whatever action adventure narrative driven games.
Yeah,
because they do the same thing.
Yeah, look. There's a knife twist here for people coming at the narrative from both sides, right? One side is, hey, look. Understand that the people who buy your platform spend 40% of their time playing non-Sony games, right? Playing black hole gas games. Now, by the same token, the people who say
90%.
Yeah, the running joke with BRAP and I is that Catella quoted 40%, and like literally in different content creator podcasts, like it keeps creeping up, like every week.
Well, that's the other thing. People are like, oh, 40. They gamers spent 40% of their time in these, these black hole games. It's like, guys, to your point, Hamp, because you and I've talked about this a lot. Well, where are they spending the other 60% of the time?
Exactly.
None of those games. They're going somewhere. So it's
and this is the crazy thing. Kind of going back to the we were talking about, which console do you buy? So a man walks into a store, right? Wants to buy a console, asks some questions about, hey, should I buy an Xbox or should I buy a PlayStation? Now, the way I grew up in business is you don't want to be the executive, right, in the boardroom who is okay with that being a coin toss.
Yeah, have fun. But if you're a publicly traded company, have fun explaining that to your shareholders that you're okay with that concept. You know what? We'll just leave it to chance.
I want that person to have a reason to make a choice. For Christ's sake, so I have one of my master's degrees is in financial management. That curriculum, that program, is the same program as an MBA, with one exception: that the 4 courses, 12 credit hours that I spent taking accounting and strategic finance, what an MBA program typically takes is marketing. 12 credit hours in this country today, right, of graduate school is about $36,000 at least. Right? Then you have people who are actually marketing. Like we don't build these people who specialize in branding and specialize in picking out what is the product differentiator, and then go on to be hired by Fortune 500 companies, right? Because that's not a thing that needs to be done in business. Anyway, look, I think that there need to be product differentiators. I think companies want there to be product differentiators. As you mentioned, Xbox has product differentiators. It has Game Pass. It has incentives. Right? It has reasons why you pick to buy a thing or not buy a thing.
We don't argue that every tier of Game Pass should have access to both PC and Xbox and offer day and date releases, access to day and date releases.
Well, we don't argue, but we definitely criticize it now that that's the case, right?
No, but that's what I'm saying. If you're going to make that argument, right? If you're going to make that argument, that pro-consumer argument, why are you making that argument for your platform?
Yes, absolutely. If you're that community, like raising pitchforks and torches about exclusives, exactly. Absolutely. Like, kind of flabbergasting to me that there wasn't, like you're saying, like flabbergasting to me that there wasn't this huge outcry about them taking day and date and moving it behind the ultimate paywall.
That's why I don't buy when they're saying when they discuss exclusivity and they're using that pro-consumer argument. That's why I don't buy it, because in their own ecosystem, they're not calling that out either. They're inconsistent. Logic, can we pivot real quick?
I think so. Oh, no. I do want to say one thing. There was a thing that I got to track about. When I asked you if you were an Xbox beta tester, right? And that a lot of people don't know that. What a lot of people also don't know is that my undergrad degree is in history and poli-sci. So this whole notion of like, well, there's no risk or no danger, right, of the race to the bottom, of that being kicked off, of low quality, low cost of access becoming the priority, is at least for me, my perspective. My perspective is heavily colored by the fact that these people who are pessimistic about the console industry, like I lived through the times where it was as bad as it could get. Right? The fear of rock. What's that?
E.T.
Yeah. When it wasn't just ET, right? That's the thing. Like there was a whole bunch of market dynamics that led to that, right? But I lived through the North American video game market crash of 1983. And we call it the market crash of 1983, but what needs to be understood is that market crash lasted for 3 years, 83 to 86. Because the Nintendo Entertainment System in North America was not rolled out nationwide until September, I think, of 86.
And by the way, Nintendo, they didn't brand it as a video game console. It was the entertainment system, and it was done. That was purposely done because of the video game crash, and that's why they included like Rob the Robot or whatever. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, but no, that's what I'm saying. Like this notion that like knocking down quality, mass amount of inventory, right, available on the market, people becoming a focus on low cost, like this notion that will never happen. No, it did happen. I saw it happen. I lived through it happen. Again, people don't get, gamers today don't get it.
There were so many bad games at that time.
Yeah.
Like literally an influx of just like people say games like I hear, oh, that game's trash. You didn't live through 1983 then.
Yeah. Like literally 83, 84, 85. I'm sitting here going through these years not knowing if I'm ever buying another video game again, not knowing if I'm ever buying a video console again, because they weren't really available. What was available were these upper tier microcomputers that were like your TI-99, your Commodore 64, VIC-20. I think maybe ColecoVision was still on the market, but the cost had gone up to being like just exorbitantly expensive. You did also have the Coleco Atom, right? The Amiga, the Atari ST, right? So, and this is one of the things that I point to where I say, I'm actually looking forward to Xbox, right? If Xbox goes down that path, bringing that back and like rebuilding that microcomputer sub-market segment.
Hey,
right. But
go
ahead.
ahead.
Yeah, well, I was as I was living through that, I'm like, we had no conscious awareness that it was going to change, that it was going to turn around. This thing that we had been being told for years was going to be a passing fad. That was the reality of that was the lens we were looking through. So don't tell me it won't happen, because it's happened before. And as a history major, right, I'm a person who believes that things that have actually gone down in history, I expect that there's a good chance that they'll occur again if we don't learn the lessons from them in particular.
Yeah, mankind has a good track record of learning from history anyway. But no, I'm glad you brought up the video game, the console crash, or the video game crash of 1983, because I pulled up some of the things that led to that. I think this is important to share with the listeners. Market oversaturation, too many consoles. There, 1983, there were a dozen or so competing systems. Here's another thing, right? We talk about exclusivity. Here's another thing that led to the video game crash that Logic just mentioned, 1983. No differentiation. Games like Hubert released across multiple platforms. I just pulled this up through Google search, with little variation, making hardware choices feel meaningless. Like, hello. Low quality games flooded the market. Minimal QA. Consumer trust eroded. So yeah, those were some of the things that led to the great video game crash of 1983. What's this guy asking here? Question. BRAP said he didn't want gacha games on the console, yet the FTC doc showed that Genshin made $1 billion on PlayStation 2 on PlayStation 2 years, basically funding Spider-Man 2. How's that not a good thing? I'm just saying I don't want all. What I'm saying is I don't want that to be the primary business model for console games.
We don't want that displacing or squeegeeing out of the industry the other titles. So in this, again, this goes back to what I talk about, right? Where there's, for us, right, there's a perspective where we speak on what we think will be good or bad for the company, what we think will be good or bad for the market, what will be good for us as gamers. What we're saying is that, look, I don't play Genshin Impact. I don't give a crap about that game. Like, that's not the content that I want to play. And I don't want that to become the primary model, right, of content that's delivered on the market. I don't want to be driven to where, like, that's the model, or things are heavily influenced by that. So that's all we're saying. I'm glad it exists, as I often say, for every game that comes out that isn't my particular cup of tea. I'm super glad that it exists, because there are gamers apparently on the market that want it. But that doesn't mean that I have to like it.
Exactly. Yeah. Hey, Logic, I want to pivot here real quick before we wrap up the show, because this actually just came up. I saw this come across my timeline about probably 2 hours ago now. Pete Hines, who's not one to mince words. Let me pull this article up here. So former Bethesda executive Pete Hines talks about gaming subscription services worth jack shit without proper support for game developers. That tension is hurting a lot of people.
Oh, Brad, just before you get deep into this, can I make one last comment about this thing?
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
So in J Slayer 66, like, I don't disagree with you. And this is why BRAP and I were saying further weeks ago that it may make sense for PlayStation to have something like that in its own portfolio in its pursuit of live service. Again, I don't think you need 12 games. I don't think you need to have invested billions of dollars chasing that nose ring, right? But yeah, if there's a game type that earns, what did you say it was? $1 billion, whatever it is, like, yeah, it's not a bad idea for PlayStation to have something like that where it's gaining 100% of the revenue, not giving, not taking a 30% cut.
Yeah, and what I also said, Jay Slayers, I don't want that to be the primary revenue model. that drives console development or drives the development of or design of console games. You may have heard me say, you look at the mobile phone or mobile gaming, right? That at one point, gamings weren't all mobile phones. I can't even talk because I'm getting tired. Games on mobile weren't all like $1.99, right? There was a race to the bottom, and then the way they monetize completely changed. That's not what I want for gaming. We talk about pork bellies and the commoditization of gaming. Like, I don't want to see that in console gaming.
All right, BRAP, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to distract you.
Yeah, no worries. So Pete Hines, who retired from Bethesda Softworks, he's former VP of Global Marketing Communications. He says, Pete Hines, again, this is Michael Kripe, hope I pronounced his name correctly, IGN, this article here. Pete Hines says gaming subscription services like Xbox Game Pass are worth jack shit. If the game, he's not saying they're completely, he's just saying they're worth jack shit if the game developers who create content for them are not properly supported. The ex-Bethesda figurehead who announced his retirement in 2023 after 24 years with the company opened up about the state of the gaming industry during an interview with what is that? I don't know. In addition to touching on the early days of the company behind Fallout and Elder Scrolls, Hines spoke about what he feels the future of services like Game Pass look like. He admits his retirement from Microsoft-owned Bethesda means his view on the matter may not be up to date. However, Hines says he witnessed what he considered to be some short-sighted decision-making several years ago that now appears to be bearing out the way I said. Subscriptions have become the new four-letter word, right? You can't buy a product anymore, Hines said. When you talk about a subscription that relies on content, if you don't figure out how to balance the needs of the service and the people running the service with the people who are providing the content, without your subscription, without which your subscription is worth jack shit, then you have a real problem. So actually, what else did he say here? Gamers have discussed the viability of platforms like Game Pass since its launch in 2017. While the service flooded with hundreds of games for subscribers to play sounds like a dream come true for players, how the developers behind these games receive support has been hazy. As Game Pass before in the early 2000s, PlayStation eventually established its own PlayStation centered competitor. More question marks popped up. Former PlayStation boss Sean Laney is one of many who recently criticized the gaming subscription service model, calling the Netflix of gaming idea a danger that has been questioning, is it healthy for the developer? And actually, it's interesting. Sean Laney actually liked this article that IGN put out with Pete Hines. I think he said agreed or something, or well said. And Sean Laney has been very vocal about the subscription service for quite some time. So, any thoughts there, Logic, on Pete Hines?
The thing I was going to say when I saw it on Twitter, I saw the Sean Layden retweet of it. The thing I was going to say on Twitter, but I'm trying to be better these days, is I was going to say, cue the defense force that I know is going to rise up to say that Pete Hines doesn't know what he's talking about. He was drummed out of Microsoft / Xbox, and so his opinion holds no weight, no value.
He's bitter.
Yeah.
I can show you Pete Hines is probably not bitter. He's retired. He's doing well. He's done well for himself. But Sean Layden's had the same criticism, and not just Sean Layden. I mean, other members, other leaders in the industry have talked about subscription services. What's his name? Bobby Kotick talked about it not being sustainable for AAA releases. Who's the guy you're a big fan of again, Logic? Gosh, what's his name?
Yeah, Strauss Zelnick.
Strauss. Yeah. Yes. He's talked about that too. So again, we're not saying that these services or Game Pass is bad, because I know people will be like, yeah, that's the other thing. If you don't wholeheartedly agree that Game Pass is the best, then you get ostracized or you get called a pony. No, we're not saying it doesn't hold value. We're actually commenting or discussing observations or commentary made by people in the industry. That's all we're doing.
Yeah, to go back to the race to the bottom, right? I'll say it again. I'll probably get accused of being a pony again and being anti-Game Pass. right? By all the game passengers out there. I don't believe that Game Pass in and of itself is a negative force on the market, right? Or the industry. I've commented several times, and I have since 2007, 18 or whatever, that I think it's positive. I think it allows certain people to get to gaming who otherwise wouldn't be able to. I think it is a bulwark against buying a game that you may not want. Right, that it provides you that. I mean, that's originally like a large reason why I onboarded into the service, because I had gotten bit by a game that I tried to get a refund for that it was broken in its progression system, and I couldn't, and I onboarded to Game Pass after that, because I was like, I can just test games out. So I think there's lots of goodness to Game Pass. I think the original voice track for what Game Pass would do for developers, that it would alleviate them from pressures and supposedly insulate them right against industry and market variance. I don't know that has come to fruition, but that was the voice track. I think if that were realized, it would be good. What I think is dangerous on the market is the convergence, should they occur, of Game Pass, 1, 2, a consumer who only cares about low cost of access, right? Only cares about LPTA products, just good enough. I didn't pay for it, so what does it matter that it's not a good game? That's 2. And the third thing is a corporation actively engaged in shitification and choke point capitalism, weaponizing Game Pass as a means to grab market share and drive down and devalue gaming. Those are the 3 forces that I worry that, should they converge, will kick off that race to the bottom. And and when I see those other 2 dynamics right occurring, those are ones that I push back on.
Yeah, no, that's a fair points, Logic, and I think Sean, I have to go back and pull the string on this. I think late in May, I think he's expressed similar concerns with subscription services. I'd have to go back and look though, but Logic, I think we need a wrap up service here.
So. Yeah. I mean, it's been somewhere between a TED talk, right, and church. Yeah. I don't fully condone it. Like, I wish we wouldn't. This is starting to get like the acquisition. Like, I wish we didn't feel compelled to do things like this. But like, for the last 2 months, right, there's been this running narrative and agenda, and like I said, politicalization and religious dogma and ideology that have come out, that have presented some things that I just don't think are true. Presented things from a very disingenuous perspective. And as I always say, as I'm wrapping up here, so like, look, my own personal innate desire is that we spend time talking about news, but like, we've felt compelled, especially tonight, after some of what we've seen during the week, that we had to address the topic. Now, the last thing that I will say is, I will remind everyone what I always say, which is that I'm not trying to tell you that you have to like exclusives, and I'm not trying to tell you that that you can't think of exclusives as anti-consumer. What we've presented to you is a perspective, and then from here you can go out, you can listen to other podcasts, you can mull it over, you can chew your cud about it, right, and you can come to your own decision. And whatever decision you come to, I'm not going to be mad at you, right? Because quite frankly, I have other things to do than get mad at you, right? But the point is for you to come here and to hear a perspective that is maybe different than the ones that you otherwise hear, right? And to present data to you, objective, driven, right? Evidence of why these things are true and represent some percentage, right, of the demographic and of the addressable market, that is not based on because PlayStation. Right, because like exactly. I said, You go to other places and you hear that argument, and it's an effort to obfuscate and deflect and dismiss things that actually tangibly and objectively exist and cannot be denied and are irrefutable. Now, how the market spins and pinions on that, and right, the outcome is, I don't know. Right. But what we're not going to do is we're not going to sit here and say that these things don't exist. We're not going to be Jerry Springer, Maury Povich, Geraldo Rivera. We are not going to do flat Earth. We never landed on the moon. There was a third shooter on the grassy knoll, and Sandy Hook never happened. We're not going to do it. We're not going to do it.
We're not going to do it at all. No, we're not doing that. Yeah. I did, I was hoping we could talk about my experience with Shinobi Art of Vengeance, but probably table that for next week because I am playing that on Nintendo Switch. So.
I don't have, we can talk. I don't have a problem doing it might actually be interesting to do a not rant. Usually we get together to do an extra show because rate of people going out sowing mischief. I don't have any problems. I picked up, I bought Star Wars Outlaws on Nintendo Switch 2.
I heard it runs well.
I heard it too. I was a little, I don't want to say I was disappointed. I had it on my list that like, okay, if this sticks the landing, I'm going to pick it up. And then it stuck the landing and I'm like, I got to pick it up. So I picked that up. So yeah, I don't have a problem, getting together and chatting about that stuff. If you got extra cycles this weekend.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. It's the nice thing about flying was that I got to take my Nintendo Switch with me and play Shinobi Art of Vengeance. And I have some thoughts on it. I think we should definitely try to I think while it's still fresh in my mind, I'd like to, if you're available, maybe try to get another show in before Wednesday. But if not, then we can table it we could table it for next Wednesday. So, I have feelings about it. So
we figured something out. I haven't been playing anything new. Well,
I've been playing one thing, Sword of the Sea as well. I started playing that.
Ooh, yeah. I've been playing one thing that's newish that nobody wants to hear about. I did finally start. I broke out my wheel and I don't know if I broke out my wheel and pedals and hooked it up to my PS5 Pro.
Yep.
Started playing F1 2025,
nice.
Which had some interesting changes in it.
Okay.
But like I said, nobody wants to hear about that. I did start playing through the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion Remaster.
Oh, okay.
Which I'm playing on PC via Game Pass out of the Xbox app. And then like I said, I'm gonna play Star Wars Outlaws. Been playing a little bit on my Portal, played some Control, but yeah, I'm gonna at least get started with Star Wars Outlaws on Nintendo Switch 2. So yeah, we can, like I said, if you get extra cycles, we can chat that out, or we could just put it front loaded on the show for Wednesday.
Yeah, no, it sounds good. All right, I want to give a big shout out to everyone in the live chat. Thanks for coming out and hanging out with us this night for this makeup BRAP, since we didn't have BRAP on Wednesday. And do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe if you enjoy the content, if you enjoyed today's conversation at least. And we'll be back regular schedule time on Wednesday at 9 p.m. Logic, I don't know if you want to be found. If you do, let everyone know where they can find you.
No, I don't want to be found. There's breaking news. I don't know. It's not really breaking news, but Bloomberg. I think this is an article. I don't know. This came straight to my inbox, so I guess there's an article up about it. But Bloomberg just recently posted an analysis on the success of the Nintendo Switch 2. Nintendo Switch 2 success shows it's still the weird genius of gaming. So that might be something interesting that people want to go.
Yeah,
check
I think we should actually talk about that on Wednesday. Nintendo.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because as much as people talk about exclusivity not mattering, or I mean, here you have because here you have Nintendo. Again, it's maddening. We have data points. We have activity in the market that says otherwise. Like, what are people like? It's maddening to me.
Yeah. And the thing I'll piggyback onto that
I'm
is
start calling a lot of these folks RFK Jr. Oh, Tylenol causes autism. Like what?
Anti-vaxxers.
Yeah, what the fuck are we doing here?
The other thing I'll piggyback onto that is I'll also say there's there's a proof point behind that argument too, that these consoles are all x86 now, so it doesn't really matter. So blah 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 blah. Again, let's keep in mind that like PlayStation and Xbox just went to x86 last generation. So now we're 2 generations in. Gaming industry has been around for 53 years. So I don't know that 2 generations, right? So but my other point is that the entirety of the history behind that has all been them being on proprietary vertical platforms, right? Where the notion of going multi-platform wasn't really an option. So, there may be changes. Changes take time. I think we should acknowledge that particularly large companies take a very long time to get their bow swung over, so.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Logic. Yeah, no, I definitely want to talk about Nintendo though, because I think it's great to see the success Nintendo is having again with the Switch 2. At least for me, when Nintendo released the first Switch, I know a lot of us were very skeptical when we heard about the miniature cartridges, and this thing's going to be a hybrid. Like who asked for that? I was part of that camp. Unfortunately, I was. I will admit that. But look, I mean, they delivered a great product with great games, great exclusives too. It was a combination. It was like it was a total package, and that's the other thing people don't talk about. Like this is, jeez. I know we're trying to end the show here, but if you look at Nintendo, and you look at the diversity in their portfolio, great first party content, great third party support with the Switch. That was something that was the first party stuff really wasn't lacking on the Wii U. But they didn't have that third party support. They had poor marketing. People didn't really know what it was. I don't think that's another conversation, but no, I'm excited to see Nintendo kind of continuing this level of success with Switch 2. I think it's great for the industry. It's great for consumers. Like you said earlier, Logic, like having 3 different competitors that are offering, there's some similarities, but also some key differentiators, and offering consumers choice.
So again, I don't want to. I'm not trying to drag Chris String. I mean, he's definitely great. I understand the perspective. But the notion of pessimism, right? And the people are innovating. I'm like, so literally, we've had since the first time since the NES and the Super NES, we have Nintendo doing back-to-back generations where they haven't just ripped the cover off of their hardware platform. Like I don't know. If we get a Switch 3, okay, maybe then there's a point to say, right, hey, I'm really kind of disappointed, not seeing innovation. I'm like, we've gotten this twice in a row. Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Right?
Well, no, but there's also been the right. I think Chris, and maybe he acknowledges this, and he just didn't include this in his comment. But there have been innovations to the business model in the console space. Like there's different ways for people to engage or consume games on console, cloud subscription services, cross-platform. So there's been some innovations there.
Yeah.
So
I also want to go back to the comment about exclusives, right? I think another way, right, to realize and true up and recognize how the argument's being made. It's often, well, Nintendo's the exception. Well, maybe not. Maybe the point is that you're the one making an exception for PlayStation, right? Because Nintendo and PlayStation are kind of doing the same thing, right? Or at least partially, right, in building exclusives. And you're trying to exert this notion that PlayStation shouldn't be doing that. So again, why are you allowing it for Nintendo, right? But making an exception for PlayStation and saying that we should apply a different standard and a different rubric for them.
Yeah. No, I agree. So, all right. If you want to follow me on X or Twitter, I'm at BRAP_podcast, and want to Give a big shout out and thank you to everyone in the live chat. Please hit that like button, helps out the channel. If you're new, consider subscribing, hit the bell notification so you're alerted when we go live. And a big thank you to my co-host here, Game Logic. Logic, always a pleasure. And we'll be back next week to discuss all things video games. So until then, everyone have a great weekend. If you're playing video games this weekend, have fun doing so, because ultimately that's what it's all about. We'll catch you next time.